I didn't prepare the slide for today, but the idea of today will be to maybe continue what we've been doing in the previous session. So we started a kind of battle charging army session last week, and we'll see to take over that scene, maybe start it from scratch, just for the people, well, not all of it, but just for the people who were not there, and just make sure that everybody is on the same line. We're also going to try to play with physics, so making some characters explode. Try to play with archery soldiers, having characters being emitted from other characters and being driven by physics. We'll be installing licenses today, and keep in mind to put your questions into the Q&A box. And I hope we get a chance to use the layer tool and finally be able to make some flux. So far we've been doing, ground adapted characters. So what if you need to do some flying or swimming or characters in space? So what kind of behavior should you expect to use? But instead, indeed, we'll start with installing the license. So if you've been filling the form we sent you in the previous Academy session emails, where we've asked you to provide a MAC address. You can use, we've been sending you a license file, so we'll see how you should install that license file. So I expect you guys have downloaded it. So if you sent us your MAC address, you should have received a link to download your license. If you haven't done so, check your emails. If you haven't received any emails, check your spam folders. Go follow the link, and it should end up with a LIC file, lick file, and we'll just take 2-3 minutes to actually install it properly. So you can see on my session, I'm still on the PLE Learning Edition, so it means that my license has not been installed. So let's see how to install it. I'm going to close my Maya session first and install it. So yeah, if you've been looking at the documentation, probably you installed it already, but that's just for the people who didn't do it. So let's do it together. So on my side, I've been downloading my license file, and it's here. I put it into a specific directory. So I put it into my drive. I created a sub directory called licenses, and I've got my Golaem full LIC license. So as I'm a staff, I've got a permanent license, but you probably have a license limited in time until the end of the project, but that's more or less the same. You got the LIC file. So if we want Golaem to know about it, we need to set up into the environment a new environment variable. And environment variable are data which are stored into your operating system and which can be read by any software, ours included. So we're going to create that new environment variable, and it has a specific name that we really need to follow. And the value of that variable needs to be the path, which is here. So on Windows, if you go into the start menu, you can start typing env for environment variables. And the best match usually is edit the system environment variables. And if you open that tool, it opens for you the system properties. And at the bottom of the system properties, you've got a button called environment variables with 3 little dots. So it means that you can set them up here. So I'm going to open that panel here. So you can set up variables for 2 different contexts. One is for your user profile. Let's say there are multiple people connected to your computer, and there are multiple users. You can just set your license for yourself. If you want it to be shared amongst every user in your system, you can set it for the whole system. So it means it will be shared with everybody. On my side, I'm the only one using my computer, but I can just stick with the user variable for my actual profile. So I'm going to create a new entry in the environment variables, and make sure that you write this properly. It's supposed to be Golaem. So make sure that you spell Golaem properly. So it's G-O-L-A-E-M underscore license in the American way of spelling it. So provide the right name, Golaem underscore license, and the value of that Golaem underscore license variable needs to be the path to your file. So as it's a common way of setting up variables, you've got a browse file button, at least on Windows 10. Else you need to copy the path yourself. So I'm going to browse the file. So I need to go into my drive, C drive, licenses, select my Golaem license, which I've just received. And now I've set up my my setup. So Golaem license, which points to my lick file. I can press OK. And well, that should be it. So if you spelled it properly and provide the right path, complete path, which goes until your LIC file, press OK there. The next time you start Maya and you load the plugin, the lock should disappear. And you should have a valid commercial license. So let's wait for Maya to restart. Yeah, indeed. And if you set your environment variable, yeah, forget to say that. If you put your variable into the system variables, it's true that you need to restart your computer, reboot the computer to take the variable value into account. So, okay, I can see I don't have the locker anymore. Let's check if the plugin is loaded. So make sure that if you haven't make it to auto load, that the plugin is loaded for the shelf to refresh. And if it's refreshing properly, should get that lock out. And also, if you want to make sure that you're correctly running the license, you can go into the Golaem menu, into the About box, and it should tell you that you've got a Golaem for Maya 8. Well, here you'll get a date, full license found, and the date next to it, which is the limitation date, the validity date of that license. Great. So hopefully you can install your license. If you haven't provided your MAC address, you can still go back to the previous email we've been sending you, so you can fill the form and we'll send you a license. So let's check if you guys were able to set it up properly. I think we've got a poll just to make sure that you're good. And as soon as this will be answered, we'll go back into our session. Yeah, if you want to throw the poll, Alex. Yeah, great, thank you. Okay. In the meantime, if you were following the previous session and you make your battle scene with a charging army in it, you can reopen that file. And if for some reason you did not follow the previous one, just to make sure that you're not going to be behind for the whole session, I'm going to create a quick simulation from scratch, but super fast. I will not redo exactly the same setup. I'll just want to have a running army that will be enough, to apply more behaviors onto this. Okay, so well, good news is most of you guys were able to set up the license properly, so that's great. Now you're good if you want to make an assignment and don't get watermarks at the end. So okay, just to make a quick scene. So once again, you can just reopen the previous scene that you had with the the soldiers running and the Romans waiting. Else, if you want to redo it from scratch, let's do another one. So keep in mind that once again, the scale of the scene will be, so I created a cube, which is 111. So this is going to be a 1 meter squared cube. So let's create an environment super quickly, which will hold, I don't know, 500 characters or something like this. So I quickly do an environment there. I'm just going to sculpt it just to add some bumps here and there. Sculpting here. Okay, let's bump it slightly. Okay, so yeah, let's create a really quick environment. We're not going to process obstacles. I'm not going to create any obstacles here. I can just turn it into a terrain. So just put my geometry into a group, but that's not mandatory. But at least select your geo. From the geo selected, create a terrain node. So select your geo there, create a terrain node from the shelf with the fifth icon. That's going to create automatically a GLM environment group in your outliner with a terrain locator in it. And it will just tell that the geometry on which the character will adapt their feet will be the P-plane one. In the previous session, we've been computing obstacles, which were super handy if we wanted our characters to avoid them. But here, there's nothing to avoid. So I can just stick with my default plane there. I also want to create an entity type from which I will load the character called Soldier Fortress. So we're going to call that character in. It's going to ask, as always, for shaders. So I want to load the Soldier Fortress. Here I'm going to use Arnold. So Soldier Fortress Arnold version of the shaders. So it's loading. It creates, as usually, an entity type file, an entity node in the scene. I can rename this soldier type. We can also check the shaders. So the shaders are here. That's the character with all the props on it. So we can feel that we'll get variation. That's something we've been seeing into the previous session as well. And well, to catch up with what we had so far, we're just going to create a pop tool. So as you want, you can create a box, you can create a circle, you can create a triangle. Here on my side, I'm going to use the freeform draw. I switch into wireframe so I can see my controllers. And if I click in one place and then I make a second click, it will create a line. If I made a third click, it will create a triangle, then a quad, and then a more advanced polygon. And when I'm happy with that, I can just press Enter to finish the construction of that geo. I can control how many characters I want to add into the system. So here I'm having 1,000. So let's control what's the distance between those guys, change the noise, and also make them face the other side. So that's something we've been seeing plenty of times in the previous sessions, right? So nothing uncommon there. And I'm going to change my orientation here to 180 degrees. So they all face toward that direction there. Okay, let's create my crowd. So don't forget from the population tool to press create. And as soon as you rewind the sim and play a couple of frames, you end up with your characters in T-pose being placed exactly where you wanted them to be placed, with some assets variation here in terms of props, in terms of armor, in terms of helmets. Great. So let's set their behaviors up of those guys. We want them to target, to all reach a specific point. So let's create a target. So from the shelf, I'm going to use the target node. The target node will create for me a new locator in the scene. I can move that locator around. I can keyframe that locator around as well. And now I can assign that locator to my character, so they're all going to target this. So if I want to create the behaviors for my characters, I need to open the behavior editor. I end up with my type here, and I can double click it to open my behaviors. And I won't go into too much details. That's something we've been seeing in the previous sessions, but we need to add a go-to behavior, which just asks them to reach a specific position. I'm going to assign that to the characters to, as soon as I, drag and drop it onto the main arrows, it becomes active for my characters. I want them to, so let's take a look at the attributes I want them to reach. What I want them to reach is the locator, which is there. So I'm going to change the target mode to use the target pop tool. As soon as I select the target pop tool, it ungrade out the dropdown, which define in what's the target I want to target. So I want to go into the dropdown, pick my target shape 1, which is the blue locator at the end here. I also want them to avoid each other and avoid the other characters in the scene. So I'm going to drag and drop a second behavior to define the navigation and the avoidance strategy of my characters. So I'm going to drag and drop it at the same spot. And if I run the sim, I should get all my characters now converging to my locator and avoiding each other. Okay, excellent. They're not really fast, so I can change their speed. The speed is going to be driven from the navigation behavior. So that's the first attributes which are controllable. So I'm going to ask them to go at 2.5 meters per second, which is basically the speed of a run animation. So now they're slightly faster, so that's good. And finally, if we pay attention, obviously they are not animated. They're still T-pose, but converging to my position. So if I want to animate those guys, I'm going to drag and drop a locomotion behavior. So that's the fourth icon into the behavior library. Drag and drop it, put it at the same position than the rest. So I just have to hover the parallel operator, release it. And as soon as I release it, it just had it stack it on top of the rest. And the final step is loading the clips into the locomotion behavior. So I can double click on it, go into the character pack, into Golaem, motions, locomotion, and we're going to grab all the animations that we have. So those animations are just what the characters are allowed to do for the duration of the simulation in terms of animation. So we're going to select all of those. If you want the attribute editor to refresh itself, you just unselect and reselect the locomotion behavior. So now we can see all the clips being loaded with the right name. And the last step to catch up with the previous thing we've been doing is those animations that we've been loading, especially the turns, they're only turning on one direction. So that's just turning right animations. So we just need to tell the system that the characters are able to turn left as well. So every time you've got a 45 degrees or 90 degrees, 145, 180 degrees, like stand orient left or walk turn right, let's enable mirroring by clicking twice on the orange circle next to it. So it's a full orange. And you only have to do it on the 8 animations, which are actually turns. Great. And now if we run the sim, we've got our characters running. Excellent. And they have all the same posture, so I can change the start frame to create a bit more diversity. Excellent. So if you had, if you had your scene from the previous time, you're more or less at the same step. But on yours, you even have Romans which are waiting on the other side. So yours is even better than that one. But I just needed to have that kind of setup to keep moving with the rest. So let's add more frames to this. And well, let's say that on this battlefield here, we've got catapults which are hitting some spots here and there onto the battlefield. And we want the characters to react as soon as they are hit by a catapult. We want them to react and to explode. So when you got something like an explosion, obviously you want to be able to bring some physics computation in the game. And you don't want to animate every single character to react from the actual explosion. So everything which is related to the physics every behavior which are related to physics are behaviors which comes with an exclamation mark into their icons. So you actually have 4 of them. And if we check what we have with the mouse, if I hover the first one, it's called Physicalize. And Physicalize tooltip is add and define the physics properties. Okay. The next one is called force. Apply a force or an impulse on a physicalized entity. Then we've got detach a bone of a physicalized entity. And finally, we've got character controller, which approximate collisions using a physics primitive. So we'll be playing with the third 3 ones, and you see that both the force and the detach both required an entity to be physicalized. So just a quick word about physicalization. I'm not really sure that's the word, but anyway. So physics by default is not enabled on a character, mostly because it's expensive in terms of computations. So if you want to enable physics, because you're going to make some physics on computation on the character, you need to use the physicalized behavior first. And once your entity has been physicalized, so once it has been added into the physics world, now you can use the force and or the detach behavior. So let's drag and drop a physics behavior. Let's put it in the wild for now, and we'll check afterwards where we should put it. But if we take a look at it, select it, we can see it has two drop downs being available first. One is the behavior mode, which allow us to pick two choices between physicalize and dephysicalize. So obviously physicalize means I'm going to add a character into the physics world. So it means that I'm going to bring the rigid body which define the characters into the physics world, and there will be applying on the overall collision system. And dephysicalize means I'm going to remove the character from the physics computation, so it's not here anymore, and it doesn't cost physics computation anymore. So if I select dephysicalize, you can see that my second drop down gets grayed out because I'm not able to pick what's the physicalize mode anymore. So what we want to do is actually adding a character to the physics world at some specific point. And then the second dropdown which is available is the physicalize mode. So physicalize mode allows us to define how does a character will contribute to the physics world. So we've got 4 different choices, and it's a pretty useful insight to know exactly what each of them is doing. So first, the default mode is dynamic rigid body, which is set up by default once again. So dynamic rigid body means that as soon as the character will be physicalized, it will be turned into a dynamic rigid body. So it means that we'll just apply gravity on it and collision on it, and it will just, fall onto the ground, and that's it. So it will just becomes, basically we call this a ragdoll. So it will be inanimated, and it will just fall according to gravity, according to colliders, and according to its own joint limits. So I'll speak a bit more about this in details, but characters, they are defined as a bunch of rigid bodies, so especially cubes, capsules, spheres, and so on, which are connected with joint limit. So like the end can't move more than that degrees of freedom. The elbow can only fold in one direction. Your shoulder can go, more than the joint limit it's having. So all is set up on the character for you, and the physics system will just follow this. But that means that as soon as the character turns into dynamic rigid body, it will just fall into the ground inanimated. It will not try to protect itself. It will not try to conserve its balance whatsoever. So it will just be inanimated and not really realistic. So that's the dynamic rigid body. But still, there are some situations where we can use it when we're going to do the arrows afterwards. So we're going to throw some arrows. Arrows, we don't need them to be intelligent. We don't need them to restore their balance or try to keep or protect themselves. We just want them to be a rigid body, conserving velocity and so on. So in case of inanimated objects or characters, that's totally available, and that's totally what you need to do. So that's for the dynamic rigid body. Then you get kinematic rigid body, which is the exact opposite. So this one, when we're in dynamic rigid body, the animation is not played anymore, and that's just the physics playing full control of the posture. Kinematic is the opposite. Here, that's a motion controlling the character, but the character will exist as a passive collider, which means that if it hits other characters which are physicalized, it will bump into characters and move them away, but it will not be influenced by the physics or by the physics collisions. So you can think about it as a passive collider, like you would do in Maya, for example. So we've got dynamic, which is full physics. We've got kinematics, which is full animation, right? And then we've got local servo and word servo. So here, rather than having just one or the other mode, so full physics, full animation, we've got mix of the both. So local servo means that we're able to play a motion. That motion will try to control the postures, but if for some reason there's a collider which forbids an animation to be played, let's say there's a wall which is next to your arm, and your animation asks it to expand the arm. If there's a collider on the way, it will stop on the collider. So you can play an animation, but still be constrained by the physics world. And the difference between local servo and world servo is that local servo will just run on everything except the root. So it means that your root will still be controlled by the full physics system and your character will fall. And the world servo means that the character will not fall. You will conserve the balance. You will still play the animation, but the rest of the body will be influenced by collisions. If it's still not clear, don't worry. We're going to play with these different modes and see exactly what's the difference when we apply those to the guys. I see some people raising their hands. If you got questions, feel free to put them into the question and answer box so we can answer those. Also quick word about how the characters are being represented. Obviously, when it goes into making physics, we don't want to simulate the full geometry there. Each of the character here, they're probably, I don't know, 20,000 polygons or something. And if we need to compute collisions with 20,000 polygons next to each other, it will take a really long time to do those computations. So characters, they are actually approximated with rigid bodies, so simple shapes, which are mathematically convenient to make collisions with. So if I go into my entity type, if I want to see how does my character looks like in terms of physics computation, I can go into my entity type and I can switch the display mode to physics shape. And when I switch to this display mode to physics shape, I can see how my character looks like in terms of geometric primitives. So you can see the arms now are capsule, the head is a sphere, the props are boxes, and this has been defined into the character definition. So that's a process which needs to be made manually when you define your characters. That's something we haven't really done when we were converting the characters ourselves, but let me show you. When you open your actual character in the character maker, once again, that's the skeleton part. It has the geometry part with all the variation and all the data and so on. And when you are in the skeleton part, there's a small panel here, which is called physics properties. And if you go into edit, it will show you for every single bone that you have on your character, it will show you what's the shape of it. So is it a capsule, a box, a sphere, or whatsoever? So you can define for each bone how you'd like to represent it into the physics world. So what is the best match for the actual geometry? We'll have also automatically the joint limits. So the joint limits are defined, by the pole vectors. Remember when we've been converting a character, we were saying, okay, that's an arm. That arm is an Nike, which goes from the shoulder to the wrist. It folds in one direction. So we know that the elbow only folds in one direction. So we can provide all those data for you automatically. If you're not happy with those, you can still change them. And regarding the shape and the position, that's something you can actually shape directly into the viewport. So if I go back to my actual character, as soon as I edit the physics shape, let me move that character maker into a different position. We're going to display for you the various shapes. So if you've been specifying the head is a sphere, you end up with a sphere in the viewport. So it's an actual Maya sphere. If you've been saying your props are boxes, you end up with an actual Maya box. And, you can grab that box, place it exactly how you'd like to approximate your shield. You can rescale it as well to fit exactly what you have. And you just, draw and do the modeling of your character. And when you're happy, you just save it. And that's just going to be stored into your character. So this is how you define this. If you want to know more about how you set this up, there are some tutorials on the website which, takes you by the hand and show you exactly how you set this up. In case of the Golaem characters, all the physics properties, they are defined on most of the characters that we're providing. So you can just use them out of the box and apply some physics computation on them. And they will react properly. If those are not defined, you end up with weird collisions or weird reaction to the physics world. Great. So let's close this down. We don't need that anymore. And let's go back to our simulation. So we can see our characters there with their props, following the animation we've been providing. So all good. Now let's apply that physics behavior to my characters. So I had my physicalized behavior here. And so that guy, just a quick note about it. Obviously, when you apply an animation on your character, when you turn your character into physics, you want to benefit from the animation, the velocity, from the inertia of your animation. If your characters are going forward and you ask them to turn into ragdoll, at least you want them to, fall forward, because they've been moving forward, so their velocity brings them forward. So the physics system has to take this into account, has to take velocities into account. So for that behavior to take velocities into account, it means that it needs to run at least 3-4 frames before it change its state and be able to change and set up the physics word. So it means that rather than using the start trigger to start it, we're going to use the stop trigger to say, okay, once that behavior has been played for a couple of frames and under certain condition, we want to stop that behavior. And as soon as we're going to stop that behavior, it's going to switch the status of my character. So if my characters are, playing an animation and I stop a physicalized behavior with a physicalized mode and dynamic rigid body mode, it means that my character will fall only when that behavior stops. So I know it can be kind of counterintuitive, but that behavior needs to run to accumulate velocities. And the only way it runs to accumulate is by running the behavior. So just remind that that behavior needs to be stopped for the effect defining it to be taken into account. So I'm not going to ask you where we're going to put this behavior. We're going to put it at the same spot than the others, because it would allow us to play at the same time and accumulate velocities. And by accumulating velocities, we'll be able to stop it and take the velocities into account when the characters will fall. So I'm just going to drag and drop it, put it in parallel with the rest. And as soon as in parallel with the rest, now I need to change the stop trigger to tell when does my character will switch from being animated to being actual full ragdolls. So let's change the stop trigger. And for now, we're just going to stick with something simple, and we're going to optimize what we have in it a bit later. So I just double click on the right arrows of my physicalized behavior. And what we can just say is use probably the simplest trigger that we have. We're going to bring a frame trigger. So please remind that here I'm editing the stop trigger. So within the stop trigger, bring a frame trigger. Within the stop trigger of that behavior, bring a frame trigger condition. Right click on it and set it as root, or use the V key. And we're going to say at frame, I don't know, frame 50, for example, I want all my characters to ragdoll down. Great. So let's play the sim. I've got my characters running, and at frame 50, they ragdoll. Obviously, I haven't defined any colliders regarding the ground, so this is why they fall and just fall onto the ground, but at least they fall forward. So they conserve velocity, they move forward. So it means that we accumulated velocities properly, and they just ragdoll down. So when people may say, okay, they are not taking the ground into account, but still they are stopping themselves at 0, 0. So it means that there's apparently a default collider, a plane at 0, 0, 0. So true, indeed, there's actually a plane, default plane, set it up. So if you want to know exactly what's going on in terms of physics environment, you have to go into the GLM environments group, expand it. You probably end up with a terrain node. So the terrain node defines where does my character gravitation will happen. So it happens on my actual geometry. Then you have a perception environment, which describe what the characters are able to feel and see. We're going to speak about that on Wednesday. And there's also a physics word. And by default, the gravitation and the physics word, they are not connected together. So it's up to you to define if they are connected, or if you want them to be connected somehow, or if you want to use different geometry to connect them. So if we go into the physics world here, we can see that we've got environment mode, which says that how does that default environment looks like. And you can see we've got a by default default plane. So default plane means that we've got a plane, infinite plane at height 0, which is the default collider. So this is why my character are stopping at 0. If you want to remove that default plane, you can just go into the drop down and press none. And now the next time you run the simulation, you'll have all the character now falling to the infinite. So not colliding anymore with the ground. Gotcha. Then you've got a gravity parameter, which is set up to 0 minus 9.80. So that value here is Earth gravity. And that just tells that all the characters are attracted by minus x. So this is why they're all falling into the minus x direction. And obviously, if we put a gravity of 0, 0, 0, will be in no gravity. And if we throw the sim at frame 50, the characters will not fall anymore in direction of the ground. They'll just fly and conserve the velocity that they had. So as all of them were moving towards, you got a moving towards crowd with 0 gravity in it. So what happens is if I put a 0, 9, 0 unit here, easy to guess. They'll just be all attracted above. And start flying. Great. So obviously we want to stick with default Earth gravity, and we probably want to also provide my geometry here as a collider. So, okay, let's rewind this. So let's say we want to bring our geometry as a collider. We need to first select the geometry here. So my plane that I have here, which I have sculpted, and I'm gonna go into the shelf and locate an icon which is called crowd rigid body. If I just hover it with my mouse, you can see it turns a Maya geometry into a Golaem physics rigid body. So once again, select your geo, click on the rigid body icon, and you can see that as soon as you click on it, you end up with a couple of triangles which are approximating your geometry. And also in your scene, there's a new node which is called the name of the source Maya geometry, which has been selected, underscore crowd rigid body. So it's kind of a wrapper of your p-plane geometry. And because the two of them are connected together, and it defines all the physics property of your collider. So if I run the sim now, I should get, I hope, my characters now at frame 50 that will fall and collide to the ground. Awesome. So just a quick word about that rigid body. You can see that it has plenty of various attributes. So you can define if it's a collider which is kinematic. Kinematic means that it will not be influenced at all by the physics. Let's say you've got maybe a ball, a sphere into your scene, and you want that sphere to be kicked by the entities as soon as they are next to it, and it's a Maya mesh, and you want it to react to the physics of the character. You can set it up to dynamic. Dynamic means that it will be controlled and influenced by the rest of the simulation. Here it's a ground, so it's fully kinematic. It will not move. You can specify what's the density or the mass of that object, if it's super heavy or if it's super light, and the collision will react to that density here. You can define the bounciness, so how much restitution it has, the frictions, and you can also define how should we approximate that geo. So as the geo here, my geo here has been sculpted and is quite complex. There's no way I can approximate it with a box, with a sphere, with a capsule whatsoever. So this is why he ended up as a triangle mesh. And also I can define a color or collision ID because I may want to be able to filter collisions between the characters and the ground for some reasons. Maybe I don't want to react if my characters are colliding with the ground, but I want to react if they're colliding with something else. So I can filter collisions thanks to those two attributes here. So if you need to change anything on your collider here, this is where it's going to take place. Great. So I said I want my characters to explode. So far they are just moving and falling into the ground inanimated. So what if I want to add some objects and some forces to my characters? I can see that I've got a couple of questions. Let me see if I need to go through those. Should we also set obstacles as rigid bodies? So I guess I answered that one, right? No, I didn't. Yeah, indeed. If you got obstacles in your scene, it will be a good thing to actually set them as a rigid body if you want them to be taken into account by the collision. Because here we're gonna, make those characters explode, so they may fall and fly into different direction. And if they hit, your colliders, your obstacles in your scene, you want them to react with collisions to those obstacles. So yeah, please turn them into rigid bodies as well. The ragdolls are going through the ground. Is that because the density of the geometry of the ground plane? So on my scene, it didn't happen, but that's mostly because I think I'm lucky. But it's true that that's something which can happen a lot, that you've got characters going through the geometry, mostly because here what we have is, is a ground, and that ground has been approximated with a triangle mesh system, and triangle mesh is not really the best type to do precise collisions. Just because, in the real world, we don't have anything which is a surface with no weights. Here that's just a plane. It's just a surface, but it doesn't have any weight on it. And obviously in the physics world, that kind of object doesn't exist. So the physics engine tried to wrap itself around using triangle meshes, but if characters go super fast or super strong into the ground, that will just go through it. So if you are not happy with the triangle mesh, there are multiple ways you can change this. One way is to increase the frequency of your scene. Here we're just at 24 FPS. So 24 FPS means that we're gonna compute collision only 24 times per second. And obviously it may happen that sometimes, the character in one frame they're here compared to the ground, in the next frame they're there, and we haven't detected any collision. So we need to increase frequency so at least we can detect a collision and react to the collision appropriately. So that's one way of solving this. Or we can also try using the 8 field. So 8 field, rather than having just a surface approximated with triangles, we're going to define just an approximation of the geometry, and everything which will be below that geometry will be a solid rigid body. So it's something which has infinite weight and characters will not be able to go through it. So you need to specify how many subdivision you want to do on both axes. And I think, let me throw the same and let's see if I get proper results on this. I'm surprised not to have any feedback on it. No, that's not working here. Let me check. So maybe 64 is not big enough. Let's provide 256 to see if I get something better. Obviously, the bigger, the higher subdivision you provide, and the longer it will take. Well, they're still going through it, so I'm not really sure what's going on here. 8 field. Let's see what else. Can you explain about how I should be in contact with physics? Not done already.
It's just some people say that when they start the physics, they jump in the air like explosion. Okay. So maybe they are in contact with the ground or with other people.
Yeah, I'll go through that afterwards then. Okay, so H field, well, it's not exactly doing what I expect it to do. Well, to be honest, if I wanted to make something like really bulletproof, I would probably have to approximate my geometry, my ground. I would have to make probably boxes, like plenty of boxes where my different slopes are, and turn them into a box. So box are, casual collision objects that you can have for your characters, collision to be computed with. So I would probably, make plenty of different boxes at different heights, provide some rotation on them and approximate my ground, because when I've got something slopey like this, that's not really convenient use case. So I'm going to stick with triangle mesh here. And let's also address the different questions we have about characters being sent into the air as the physics triggers. So if something is happening in your scene, also, it means that as soon as the characters gets into the physics, they are probably in collisions with something exactly at the moment as they turn into the physics. So maybe they are in collision with another character, maybe they are in collision with the ground, maybe because the terrain is not defined properly, maybe because your avoidance is not defined properly and your characters are in collisions with each other. So obviously, if you got two characters being in collision at the moment that they turn into a physics system, the physics engine gets nuts. And as it gets nuts, it doesn't know how to handle this. So the character just explode. So best is to check exactly what's going on if they are in collisions with each other, and also make sure that the physics behavior turns for at least 2 or 3 frames to integrate velocity and to try figuring into which situation it is. Best case scenario is rather push the characters around and make more space around your characters so they're not in collisions altogether, and run the same. And if it's not fixing your issue, just increase the frequency of your scene. So here I'm just in 24 FPS. And also you can increase the frequency of the physics. So by default, if you go into the physics solver, it has some NVIDIA physics solver properties. It has a number of substeps, so you can also increase your substeps here. So substeps means that per frame, we're going to run the physics engine 3 times. So at 16, 16.0.03, 16.06, and then 17. So we're running internally the physics engine multiple times. So the collisions are more accurate, and that should help. If it doesn't help, probably there's something you haven't followed properly. So feel free to get in touch with support afterwards, send us your scene, and we'll let you know exactly what your issue here. But if all the characters explode at the same time, that's probably because there's an issue with collision with the ground or something similar. Okay, so let's move forward. We're specifying anyway. We'll just activate physics on a subset of characters here. Here for now, I'm having 500 characters falling into the ground. I probably will have just 10 or 20. So if they're just all exploding, all the time, we're just anyway, we'll just remove the physics collisions on most of the character and just have it for just a bunch of characters. So still you can follow the rest of the tutorial here. So yeah, actually let's figure who's going to explode and who's going to turn into a physics character. So as usual, we probably want to define a zone into the scene. So maybe I can go into poly modeling and define maybe a polygon disk. And that polygon disk will just be the zone in which my catapult has hit at a specific moment. And when my characters are within that zone at a specific moment, I want them to explode. So let's create a polygon disk, put it into an area which is convenient for my characters. Let's say it's going to be here. Let's scale it appropriately, something like this. And let's put it slightly above, or slightly below the ground. And I'll turn into wireframe so I can see it anytime. So, okay, now I want to change my physics trigger to take into account that my characters will only explode when they are into that disk and at a specific frame. So let's go into my behaviors. Let's open my behavior editor. Let's go into the physicalize stopping trigger. And let's change the actual stopping trigger. So we need it to be into the zone at a specific time. So which triggers we should use? That's probably an easy question here, right? And yeah, see ya, Sajil. Take care. Okay, you guys all sleepy today, so I'll answer the questions myself. Okay. Oh, the collision clock. The third one. So indeed, there's a collision trigger we could use, and we may want to use it, by the way. But yeah, if we want to be able to take into account the zone that we have here, the mesh that we have here, indeed, the polygon zone will be handy into that situation. And the second one will be handy as well, because I want, the catapult to explode at a specific moment. So I'm going to bring my polygon trigger. I already have a frame trigger so I will consider it and use it into that setup. So I'm going to connect my disk with my polygon. So as always, the shortcut on the keyboard is select your zone, press Shift, select your trigger. So it allows to keep the selection. And as we've been selecting the trigger, now we've got the attribute editor of the trigger. We can press Map. It will connect the disk into that trigger there. So if we press V to enable it, and if we want to test that system, we should get all the characters which are in the disk to be influenced. So as soon as the character run into the disk, you can see now they're all falling into the ground and stacking on top of each other. Great. Obviously, a catapult just hit at a specific moment. So we want to combine this with that specific moment. So let's say it will hit at frame 100. So we only want the characters which are into the zone at frame 100. We're going to change the current frame trigger to say frame 100. And we want to combine those two triggers together. So let's see what operator we should use if we want to have both the zone and the frame being evaluated. So I've got the end. Looks like everybody agreed on the same operator. So indeed, we're going to use the end trigger, the end operator, and we're going to use the middle click to connect the polygon from the polygon to the end operator and from the current frame to the end operator as well. And let's see what we got. Hopefully I get lucky. I'll have characters at frame 100 into that zone. Yes, I do. There's a few. And now you can see all the characters which were in the zone at frame 100. They failed. All the other ones, they just go through it. And you can see even the characters which are running, they are, hitting the other ones. And as soon as they hit them, they are influenced by the other characters. Sweet. Let's say that catapult will hit twice. It will hit at frame 100 and it will also hit at frame, 200. It hit exactly the same spot. What should we do if we want my characters to fall at frame 100 and at frame 200? Should we bring a new trigger? If yes, what kind of new trigger should we bring? Should we bring a new operator? And if yes, what new operator should we get into the game? So first answers are using an OR operator. So, okay, let's see. We've got the OR operator. Okay, let's bring it. Someone is telling me to add a new frame trigger. So let's add a new frame trigger. Okay. Or between 2 time triggers before. Okay. Frame 50 or frame 100 and trigger and triple zone. Yeah, that's the correct answer. So indeed, we're going to set a new frame trigger. We're going to specify it's going to explode at whatever the value you want. I'm going to put here 200. And what I'll do is connect those two to a OR operator. So we want this to be true if either the frame is 100 or the frame is 200. So we're having an alternative choice. And we also want to make sure that at those specific moments, the characters are within the zone. So we're going to still keep the AND operator and connect all of those together. So now we're saying as soon as characters are in frame 100 and 200, in any of the situation and characters are in the zone, they're going to trigger that physicalized behavior. So let's check at frame 100. First character should fall. So first wave. Okay. So all good. And at frame 200, if I got some characters in, they fall. Great. And all the rest, they just go through, no problem. So yeah, well done. That was the good answer. Excellent. So, okay, I'm quite happy with that system, but still the characters are not really reacting to a catapult hit. So we should probably now change their behavior and make them explode. So we're gonna add a new behavior here. And that behavior is one of the two I've been detailing earlier. And it's actually, if I hover the mouse, it's actually the force behavior I want to take into account. So force behavior, if I hover the mouse upon it, it apply a force or an impulse on a physicalized entity. So we've got physicalized entity. So it means that now that we have a physicalized entity, we can apply an extra behavior on it, which will, make them fly. So we're going to apply an, an impulse on them and let the physics engine solve that impulse and how it should be taken into account by the character's body. So let's bring that force behavior in. And let's check where should I put it, as always. Should I put it maybe here before? Should I put it maybe here after? Should I put it before the physicalize, after the physicalize, before the locomotion, after the locomotion? You tell me, or before navigation, after navigation, before go to, after go to. You tell me. Beside physicalized on the right side. So I guess you're referring to put it here. In parallel of the physicalize, after the physicalize. After the physicalize. Yeah, it's the actual, it's the good answer here. So you got two ways to put it after the physicalize. You can put it either here, that will be after the physicalize, or you can put it actually really after into the flow. For that specific use case scenario, I'm gonna put it there to make something different. We've been putting behaviors in the parallel a lot of time before, so I just want to show you a different way of doing it. So I'm gonna put it after, and remember, if I want to switch into that block here, I need to tell my parallel operator that it can exit as soon as one behavior has ended. Before, let's throw the sum just one time, and let me show you exactly what I mean. So if I go until frame 100, let's go into a frame 100 here. So I'm frame 63, and let's check for a character, 78, 90. Let's select that guy here, which will be clearly influenced by my simulation and my zone. Let's select that guy there. Okay, here. If I go until frame 100, you'll notice that as soon as I'm frame 100, my physicalized behavior stops. but I'm never playing the force behavior because right now the parallel operator waits for all the behaviors to stop. And for now, only one behavior has stopped, that's the physicalize, and the other ones, the locomotion, the navigation, the go-to, they are running. They are not visible onto the final posture because the physicalize takes full control of the final posture, but they are still running and they forbid the parallel operator to exit. So if we want to change that actual behavior of the parallel, we can select the parallel and specify when does that exit, when does that operator exit, and it's going to exit as soon as one behavior has ended. So as soon as the physicalized behavior has ended, it means that it will exit everybody. So it will exit automatically the locomotion, the navigation, the go-to. They will be stopped, even if their trigger say them not to stop. So they will be forced to stop, and we're going to switch into the force behavior. So now, if I launch my sim again at frame 100, I'll have my physicalized behavior, which will stop, and we should see the force behavior, which is running now. So now we've been stopping the parallel operator, and now we're playing the force behavior. Great. My force behavior doesn't have any impact. We can see here the characters that just fell onto the ground. We haven't changed anything on them. So obviously we need to fine tune that force behavior to apply the real effect of what the catapult would have done here. So let's select, well, wait, it's 7:05. Should we do this now or should we do it after? Yeah, let's stop for now. Let's make sure that you all were able to get the force running, and we'll fine tune that right after the break. So we make a 5-minute pause. It's 7:06 on my side. So let's meet back at 11 past 7, and we're going to resume with exploding characters. If you got questions in the meantime, feel free to put them into the Q&A section. And yeah, see you in a minute. back. I'll just wait for people to join back. And resume and make the characters explode. So, okay, let's check within that force behavior. Let's check what we have in terms of attributes. And that will just let a couple of seconds for the other people to come back. So first we've got a dropdown, which allows us to define if we want to have a force or a torque. So force is a linear. So force behavior just means that we're going to apply a force to a character. And that force can be of two different types. One is it's a linear vector. So it's just a direction that you're providing, and the character will be pushed into that direction. If you provide the torque, it's a rotational force. So it's more, you have characters spinning or rolling or something like this, where with the force, you just have characters being pushed into one direction. So here, in case of a catapult, we'll just use a force. Then we've got a force mode, which can be either an impulse or a constant force. So impulse just means that we're going to apply that impact at one frame. Constant force means that we're going to apply that impact at every frame during which that behavior will play. So think about constant force more like about a drag gravity or something. Like you've got maybe one use case which comes a lot is you've got like an alien I'm not sure what's the name for that, spaceship, which need to attract characters in it. And you want to apply a constant force because you want the characters to be dragged into the spaceship. Where when you hit by a catapult, explosion, or whatsoever, it's more like a impulse. Yeah, flying saucer was the word I was looking for. Teacups. I was about to say teaspoon something, plate, which didn't mean anything. So flying saucer, that's the right word. Thank you. So when we do a catapult impact, we want to use the impulse mode. Then we got our attribute. We can skip those. And then you can see we've got two main boxes, two main panels here. One is the direction. So direction defines the vector in which your characters will be influenced. And magnitude defines the length of that vector. The higher, the bigger the length, the higher the impact on the characters. So let's test how it's working. For example, let's say we want the characters to be just launch into the air. We can just put a direction which is 0, 1, 0. So 0 means 0, 1, 0 means that we're gonna ask the characters to go on the y-axis up. So that's the direction. And then we've got a magnitude. So I'm not really sure what the unit, I think it's Newton per centimeter square. Well, short word is you put some values. If it's not big enough, you just put a higher value. If it's too big, you just put a smaller value. It's not really easy to figure exactly what you need. So let's put, for example, 10, run the sim, and see what we get at frame 100. Probably frame 100 is maybe too far. I'll probably change my trigger. So yeah, you got your characters here. Some of your characters flying into the up axis and falling down into the ground after they just being hit by the impulse. Let me just change this so I don't have to wait 100 frames every time. I just go into my trigger and say probably 50 frames and 100 frame. Great. So, okay, yeah, put a magnitude of 10, which is probably not big enough. Let's put 20 into it instead. Well, I'll put 5 actually. So let's put 10 and see what we get. At frame 50, we should get characters, yeah, being thrown into the air. That's just 2 of them, so not so many. And at frame 100, some more. So here you can totally see the ragdoll problem. The characters had a posture in the air, which is not really realistic at all. So we're going to arrange this afterwards. So yeah, okay. When you hit by a catapult, obviously you're not flying into the air like this. Depending on where's the impact, you're going to be influenced by the direction of the impact. So if the hit of the explosion is on your right, you're going to be thrown onto your left. If it's behind you, you're going to be thrown in front of you. If it's in front of you, you're going to be thrown behind you. So you want to be specifying something which is independent from the character orientation, right? So let's see what we got. So we're going to go back into the direction, put a 0 into this because that's not something we want. So we've got another one, which is character relative. So character relative means that it's going to take the character orientation into account. And you're able, for example, to say, I want all the characters to go on their left, independently from what's their orientation. I want all the characters to go on their left. So here as well, that's not something we need. Instead, there's something called the direction locator, and that's something which is more appropriate to our use case here, is that we are able to set up like an epicenter, and that position will be the position from which the vector, the direction will be computed based on the character position. So let me rephrase this. I'm going to create a locator in my scene. So I go into the create menu in Maya, select locator. Locator will allow to just to create placement. So I'm going to put that placement on top of my circle right below. And when my characters will be, and I'm going to put it, slightly on the ground as well. The 8 at which it is important. So I'm going to put it slightly below the ground, something like here. And what we'll do is when the characters will be physicalized, we're going to take the actual root position. We're going to take the position of the locator and we're going to draw a vector. And that vector will be the direction which will be applied by the characters. So depending where they are compared to that actual position, they will be influenced by the actual locator and that actual vector. Let's connect that locator to the behavior. So first I select my locator, and using shift, like we've been doing with the triggers and the meshes, I select the locator, select the force behavior, press shift together. I'm going to map it into the direction locator. So now I can see I've got the name of my locator here into my scene. And if I throw my simulation, we should see that the characters will be influenced by the direction. So if they are, behind it, they are pushed by it. And that guy here was pushed forward. And now they're kind of being pushed by that locator position. Let's provide maybe a higher magnitude so it's more obvious. And I probably want to put it, below the ground because I want my characters to slightly fly in the air. So if I put it below the ground, the vector will point towards the air and I've got a better explosion. Let's see what I get now. Okay. Okay. Okay, that's better. So that's better, but still have that ragdoll issue I was referring earlier, which has my character have, well, wait, let's not tackle this like right away. Let's maybe finish the force behavior. So sorry, I was forgetting something. So here, and you know what? I'm going to create a bigger disk because I want more people to be influenced by my catapult. So let me expand the disk. So I'll have a bigger explosion, so it'll be more obvious. Frame 50. Okay, now I've got a lot more characters being pushed up. Frame 100, slightly more characters. And let's put the locator still a bit lower so my characters will explode above. Okay, great. So something I still want to tweak here is if my characters are really far from the locator, or if they are really close from the locator, it doesn't make any difference. I mean, the magnitude here they are influenced with is still the same. So you would expect that if they are on, really far from the locator, but still into the zone, they will not be affected as much as if they were like really close to the locator. So you also want the magnitude, like the length of the vector, to be influenced by how close you are from the impact of the explosion. So if we check the force magnitude attribute, here we've been specifying a value of 20 for every single character. So this is why they're all reacting the same way. So we can put this back to 0. And instead, we're going to use the magnitude locator to say, okay, if you're close to the locator, so let's take a distance into account, you'll have some specific magnitude. And if you're far from the locator, you have another specific magnitude. So let's once again select my locator. Let's press Shift once again, select the force behavior, and connect the locator, the same locator, into the magnitude locator as well. Okay, as soon as we connect that same locator into the magnitude locator, we've got 4 new attributes being available. One is the minimum distance and the maximum distance. If I increase the maximum distance, we can see that we've got a zone which gets displayed into the viewport. So we have to make sure to match that zone with the actual zone we've been drawing into our scene. So more or less something like this. So as soon as the behavior is selected, now the zone will be displayed. And we can define what's the magnitude at the minimum distance. So my minimum distance is 0. So when you are super close to the locator, what's the magnitude you're getting it with? So we're going to provide some really high value, let's say 50. And what's the magnitude when you are at, the limits of that zone here? So we can still provide some value like 10. And now we should get, and everything which is in between will be linearly interpolated. And now when the simulation will run, you'll have characters really close to the epicenter, which will get a high force, and characters which were really at the limits get a lower force. Great. And still I want to put that locator maybe still below. So my characters get being sent in the air. Excellent. So that's probably way too big for, I'm not sure how Catapult were working before, but that's probably way too high for just a stone be thrown by a wood device, right? But anyway, let's say that's exactly what I want here. Great. So still, remember, we're still in ragdoll mode here, which means as soon as the character explodes, they've got some pretty weird posture. So they don't try, to conserve their balance or whatsoever. They're just thrown in the air, apply an impulse of them, and they're just controlled by joint limits, gravity, and forces. So what if I want to have an animation being played at the same time? So I've been converting an animation from Mixamo, and I think Alex will share the links with you guys. So that's an animation of a guy, it's a falling animation. So the guy is just crawling his arms like this. It's a loop animation. So we're going to share it with you, put it into the chat box. So you can download that file. So that's, once again, it's a motion from Mixamo. If you want to know how to convert animation from Mixamo, we've got tutorials on the website if you want to know how to convert characters and motion. So Mixamo is a free database from Adobe. And you can, grab characters and animation. I'm pretty sure you guys already heard about it. It's free. You just have to register on the website. But here I've been converting one of their animation already. So it already exists as a Golaem motion. So Golaem, Alexander has been posting it into the chat box. So click in the link, download that animation. I'm going to grab it myself as well. So I'm going to download it as well, put it into my project. And we're going to use it to play as soon as the characters are flying. We want them to play that animation. So let me put it into my project, into Demo Academy 2022, put it into Golaem. And let's create a new folder called Motions. And let's put that falling animation in it. Falling. Great. Awesome. So I'll just wait a couple of seconds for you guys to be able to download that file, put it somewhere convenient in your project so you can find it back. So that's a GMO already converted to be used onto our characters. And let's create a motion behavior. So what we want to do is to play as soon as our characters are flying around. We want them to play a specific animation, and we want that animation to be combined with the physics. So as long as the characters have the space and everything they need to play the animation, it's okay. As soon as they hit a collider, we want those motions to be constrained by the collision and not going through a mesh, an obstacles, a wall, or whatsoever. So let's bring a motion behavior. Let's rename that. Well, we should have renamed our behavior anyway, but let's rename this folding anim. And we'll double click on it to load it. So it's going to be into my Academy 22 folder, Golaem motion folding animation. So let's take a look at how that clips looks like. So I can go either into the motion clips outliner here, or I can select my folding animation behavior, click on the superior sign and click on the preview button, and we can see how the motion looks like. So it's 150 frames animation of a character crawling for a while and then just stopping. So as usual, where should we put this behavior? Should we put it after the force behavior, before, in parallel, or anywhere else? Let me know where you guys will put it. After impulse is just a frame, in parallel with the force behavior, parallel with force. Those are all valid answers, actually. So true. And the reasons that people came with is actually correct. Since impulse is just a frame, we could put it after, but we'll have to do an extra operation, which is changing the stopping trigger. We'll have to say, okay, that behavior stops right after one frame, and you can play the following animation right afterwards, and that will totally work. So that's a good answer. If you don't want to change that trigger, or if you want maybe to change the impulse from a constant force, so to have something more flexible, I would put it at the same time. So that would also work. So if I put it at the same time, now I'm saying, okay, at the same time of playing the impulse, I want to play this animation. And we want to do one extra thing to take this animation into account. Can someone guess what we need to set up? We need to change one drop down somewhere. Because if I just, run the sim now, I'll have my impulse and still my character is being ragdolled. I'm still not playing my folding animation properly. Any guess, anyone? Because they're still ragdoll, so we need to tell them they not have to be ragdoll anymore. So someone comes with an answer which is kinematic or priority free. Behavior mode to kinematic. Okay, apparently people came with an agreement that we should turn the physicalize to kinematic. Let's see. So let's go into, so it's not that far, but let's try. Let's go into the physicalized behavior. And let's say we want to turn the characters into kinematic. And let's see what we get. So let's run the same until frame 50 comes. And as soon as frame 50 comes hit, now we're playing that full animation. So indeed, we are playing the full animation. So it's kind of correct. But now that we're playing the full animation, we're not playing the physics anymore. So we need to find a way to have physics and animation being combined. And I've seen it into the chat box. Some people, one people actually, yeah, we can add water, or we can change the physics mode to be able to combine both the physics and the animation. So if we pick local servo, it means that the posture, all the characters' posture will be driven by the animation, except the root bone. So the root bone will be thrown over. Obviously, you don't want the root bone to be controlled by the animation, because this animation doesn't have any influence, any impulse story in it. It's just a root fixed falling animation. So you want the root, the overall position of the character, to be controlled by the physics. You want them to explode, and you want them to have a bullet trajectory. But you want the rest of the body to be controlled by the physics with some collision on it. So if we switch it to local servo, this allows it. And word servo means that everything in the posture will be controlled, even the root. So the characters will not have the bullet trajectory anymore. So that's exactly the one we'd like to use, local servo. So as soon as the character will be thrown, now they're playing the falling animation. So we're kind of trying to get their balance in. So they're not ragdolled anymore. And when they fall into the ground, they still keep playing that animation, keeping that posture. So trying to kind of survive what's going on. And this is how you do a physics scene, World War Z style physics scene. If you just have enough characters being snapped on top of each other, this is how you get the pyramids like you get in World War Z or that kind of effects, because you get both animations and physics at the same time. So characters are going to be bunched and stacked on top of each other, and they still are able to play some crawling animation on top of each other and react to each other based on collisions. So hopefully that makes sense. Great. What if we had maybe another catapult, and at frame 200, you want the characters here to be influenced by the exact same system? What would you do? Would we have to recreate the behaviors? Would we have to recreate the triggers? Would we have what should we do? Let's say at frame 200, I want those characters here to be influenced by the exact same zone, the exact same settings. And I've got a question, which is kind of convenient, which is, can you animate the disk? And the answer is yes, you can animate it. Is it relevant? Could we use that? So either move it and add triggers, or add a new one. Yeah, it's a correct answer. Either move it and add triggers, or add a new one. So if you just decide to just add triggers, let's say you want to add a new zone here and a new trigger, frame trigger there. The problem is the locator, which is set up into the force behavior, is the locator which is here. So if you want to have a second impact there, you want to make sure to reset another behavior with another locator system, and so on and so forth. Or what you can just do is animate the disk and the locator. So put some keyframes on top of them. So I'm going to put a keyframe at frame 150, so they stay here until frame 150. And at frame 200, I want that system to be there, for example. Let me check if that worked. So yeah, my locator and my zone, they are keyframed, and I can just change my system, add a new trigger to say at frame 200. So I want to connect it to the OR once again. At frame 200, I want my characters to explode. And as the system has been moving around, now my zone is at a different position. So the characters which are in that area will be influenced. So at frame 50, I got all the characters here flying around. At frame 100, another collision system. Then my zone and my locator will move around. And at frame 200, I'll have the characters in that area which will react. Awesome. Should we fine-tune this even more? Yeah, we should detach the props as well. So I've got a question. Let me check this one. Is it possible to use like an animated noise to trigger zones to make a lot of explosion on the whole ground without setting polygons and frames? So let me think about this. Is it possible to use something like an animated noise to trigger zones to make a lot of explosion on the whole ground without setting polygons? Okay, I get it. So sure, if you want to have like plenty of explosion, what you can just do is just a random trigger being dynamic with a really low value. So I can quickly show you without breaking too much of my system. So let's say you want to have something like a mine field and you want characters to be randomly flying. What I can just do is change my trigger. So I've got my full trigger system here. So you don't have to change it on your side. I just want to answer that question specifically. I can just bring a random trigger. I'm going to set it as root. So now that full system, which is here, I'm not destroying it, but I'm saying this is what I'm going to use for my actual shot. And I can provide a really low chance at every frame. So I'm going to say at every frame, I want 0.5% of my crowd to be influenced by the physics behavior. So I'm going to press OK. And at least actually they will be influenced by the locator. So I'm not sure where's the locator, but they will react based on the locator. So what you may want to do is provide a force which will be related to the characters instead of having something related to a locator. But if you throw the same, you can see here and there, you got some characters randomly exploding. So 0.5 is still too high, probably. Yeah, it's probably still too high because almost at every 10 frame, I'm having a character. So you can provide a really low chance, like 0.05 maybe. Oops. 0.05, 10 times less. And now you've got something more random that you can control, and you can still put a delay next to it, combine it with other operators which are related to, I don't know, a distance or whatsoever if you want. Hope that answers the questions. Great. Yeah, let's go back to my setup that I have. So let's put back my trigger, which is relying to the zones. And let's also maybe detach the props. So obviously when you're hit, well, obviously, I guess that's not so obvious, but when you're hit by a catapult, which is something which is not happening to you every day, I figured you probably like leave your props behind, like especially when you got a sword and a shield, which are super, super heavy, you know, probably 10, 12 kilos. You don't want to keep them in your hands as soon as you're hit. You're probably like leaving them behind, right? So for that specific matter, we actually have the detach behavior. So let's take a look at, so let's drag and drop a detach behavior. So detach behavior is right after the force. So you may see one guy who's losing his arm. And if I hover the mouse upon it, it tells detach a bone of a physicalized entity. So once again, it has to be applied on the physicalized entity. And if I select the detach behavior, I can see it has two different attributes. One is a dropdown, which allows to detach or attach, And next is a string attribute, which contains the name of the bone to detach. So I can open the helper. The helper will show me all the bones being available for my actual character. And that will be up to me to decide what I want to detach. So let's say I want to detach an arm, and let's show you why it's not a good idea with this character here. Anyone can maybe figure what's going to go wrong as soon as I will detach an arm on the character? Which should I expect to happen? Well done. Yeah, smart people in the room today. The geo will stretch, correct? Indeed. So let me say I want to detach the left shoulder, and let's see what will happen. And by the way, where should I put this behavior? Once again, should I put it? Let's open the view. So should I put it after everything? Should I put it at the same time? Should I put it before? You tell me. Parallel again. Same. So I guess you mean parallel again. So that's a good answer. Indeed, parallel. So as soon as the physicalize stops, it will stop locomotion, navigation, go to, and then we want to apply a force. At the same time, we want to break the props, and we want to play a falling animation. So if I do this, and I stick with the physics shape view, that'll be good. I mean, that's fine. You can see the arm detached. That's totally what we expected. But obviously, you guys had the good answer here is that as soon as I go back into GPU render previews, as the skinning has not been made, especially to be able to detach that bone, we're applying a translation and the skinning is not able to know this. So the characters stretch, obviously, and that's not what we want. So yeah, it's true. It looks like Mr. Fantastic now on the character. So, but only on the left arm. So what we can do is rather here, the weapons, there'll be, we have specific bones for the weapons because we wanted to be able to detach those guys. And those are just have the geometry of the weapon being skinned on it, and they are next to the wrist of the character. So when it detach, it doesn't impact the skin or the meshes, the rest of the meshes of the character. So now you can select weapon left and right and apply this rather than having the left shoulder. And as soon as the character will explode, they'll drop their props behind. So you can see all the shield and the spear, they're still flying around and fall into the ground, hit the ground, collide with the ground, or even go through the ground because they hit the ground way too fast. So I probably have to increase frequency or put, especially on that zone, put some extra colliders for the characters not to go through them. Should we add a random trigger so they don't lose all their weapons? Yeah, that's a good, that's actually a good notice if you want to improve the shot. Indeed, you can add a start trigger here and randomize the start of it. And even to make, even more organic, even more different, you can actually break the detach. You should add 2 detach behaviors, one for the left weapon, one for the right weapon, and put 2 different random triggers here. So some characters will drop 1, which can be either the sword or either the shield. Some will drop 2, some won't drop any. So up to you to decide and to improve the shot until you get something you really like. Awesome.
Nico, can you show how to share triggers, because I can't find it in the documentation? Someone asked in the question.
Is it possible to use trigger node on multiple behaviors if some behaviors need to be synchronized or for optimization purpose? Yeah, absolutely. Let me show you that. So what should I do? Should I share? Okay, let's say we would like to share that really huge trigger that we've been doing with maybe the locomotion behavior. We want the locomotion behavior to stop, even if it's not convenient. Well, even if it's not required in our case. But let's say we want to share that locomotion, that trigger with the locomotion. So all the different behaviors here, if we select them, all of them have a triggers attribute panel, which is closed by default. So if we check the Physicalize, for example, we select it, it has a trigger attributes channel. And we can see that that guy here has a start trigger, which is called BE Physicalized 1, which is the name of that guy here. Start trigger, because that's its start trigger shape. And it has a stop trigger, which is called BE Physicalized 1, stop trigger shape. If we take a look at the locomotion behavior, if we select the locomotion behavior, once again, it has its own triggers attribute panels. I can expand it. I can see I'm using BE locomotion 1 start trigger, BE locomotion 1 stop trigger. So now I guess you start to sense what I'm going to do. Those are drop downs, which allows you to inspect everything which is in the scene. And what you just have to do is to figure where is your BE Physicalize stop trigger and say, okay, my stop trigger for this behavior is going to be this node here. And now when I'm going to select the trigger into the scene, so now you see those two guys are grayed out because we've been changing the default trigger. And if I select that stop trigger for my locomotion, it select that one as well. If I select this one, it select that one as well because they are the same. So when you select one, it actually select both. So if for some reason, indeed, as you're saying, for optimization reasons, you don't want the computation to run twice because, checking if a character is in the zone can take a lot of time to compute. So for optimization, that can be great to share triggers, to avoid redoing the same work again and again. That could be great sharing triggers, but keep in mind that one trigger, if within your trigger, you've got a motion time or a behavior time trigger, if you share them, they will not be applied on all your behaviors the same way. I mean, let's say you want to check if your behaviors has been running for 2 frames or 20 seconds or whatsoever. If you share that trigger with another behavior, only the first one will compute the behavior time, and you will stop that second one when the first behavior, which was connected to it, has played the time for a specific length. So keep in mind that when you have those two different triggers into your trigger graph, it's not being applied on all the behaviors, it's applied on one, and the result is shared amongst all the behaviors. So I hope that makes sense. One last thing I wanted to do on that scene is here, I've not really checked. Let's go back into the physics shape view. I've not really checked if that was the case, but I would expect if some characters are hitting other characters, I would expect my other characters to being applied in full and, well, like that guy here is being hit by another guy, but is not going to react at all to that collision. So to have that kind of domino effect, I would expect my characters to run a specific setup of behaviors. So I want them to be able to take that collision into account and maybe just fall as soon as they are being hit. So should we do the break now? Or yeah, we should do the break now. Take 15 minutes now and tackle that last point right after. So it's 10 to 8. And also that get me a chance to sort out the blades, which will close at 8. So yeah, let's the blinds. So let's meet again at 8:05 to finish that scene, and afterwards we'll switch to the archery scene. So yeah, see you in 15 minutes, guys. And feel free to put questions in the meantime. Okay, back. Just wait for people to join back. Hopefully you had a chance to have a coffee or lunch, quick lunch or breakfast. Well, there was a questions which has been closed, but I wanted to maybe show. One person was asking that you still have a lot of people going through the ground, and what way do you have to actually fix this? So I kind of answered that a bit earlier, but let's say would like to specifically tackle that problem. And also on my side, I think I have characters. Let's see. I think I have characters going through the ground here and there. Yeah, that guy here. Yeah, some props also are going, through the ground. So if I had to, tackle this and locate that zone. So as I was saying earlier, that's probably because having a triangle mesh collision rigid body is not something which is the most convenient, and it doesn't produce the best collision. The best way to get the most accurate collision is by using some really simple shapes rather than using that kind of sculpted geometry. So where you have issues, you also want to probably provide more colliders and subdivide your environment as simple shapes. So especially something I could do is probably I would create a cube, like a real box, something, which is going to be at my scene origin. And I don't want to scale it. I want to provide some white and depth, and put it, align it with my ground where I have some issues. So let's make it like slightly bigger. And obviously, as my ground is composed of multiple tiles, I probably want to duplicate this. So I want to provide a nice orientation to align it with my ground. So especially where you have some issues, you may want to put it slightly below your ground. May want to probably duplicate it a second time, make another one. Something like this. And make this here and there where you have some people going through. And the fact of having boxes makes now that you can have rigid bodies in your scene, which are way more precise and has a white in it. And really what's the problem with the plane is that it doesn't have any white. So you need to provide some volume there, because real life is all about volumes. You don't have anything which has no white at all. So oops, I'm not really good with setting up this, but yeah, you want to make like a real box and select those two guys, or as many as you have in your scene. Go into Golem, select the crowd rigid body shape, and you can see that those guys, that guy has been set as a triangle mesh, but you can convert it back to a box. As a duplicated, my geo is not able to read it, but okay, anyway. So this one is a box, so that's fine. And this one, we can set it up to convex maybe instead. And the next time you throw your sim, those will act as extra colliders, which will be taken into account by your scene. And if people fall back on those rigid bodies, they will really bounce back on those rigid body and will not collide and go through the ground anymore. So that's just a way to have more accurate collision. So we've got a tutorial which explain all the differences between the different types of shapes that you have, and what are the pro and cons of using it, and also how you can get most accurate collision by increasing frequency of the physics solver, and that kind of acts as well, because it's something which is really casual. So yeah, I was saying also earlier that I wanted my characters to be able to collide with others and make a kind of domino effect. So let's say we want to improve our graph. And that was actually, I took the break to also figure how I would do that, because I'm not really sure how I would tackle this, but let's see what we can do with that. So we want the characters to be able to become ragdolls as soon, well, not ragdolls, but becomes, yeah, we want them, okay, let's do this. We want them to become ragdolls as soon as they are hit by another character. So that means that as we want them to have a different mode, a different physics mode than the one we've been specifying here, it means that we need to bring in another physicalized behavior, which will set my character to dynamic. So let's bring a new, well, let's probably rename that physicalized behavior like Catapult Physicalize, or Catapult Physicalize. So we'll know that this one reacts to being hit by the zone at some specific frames, right? And we want to have another one, which is characters physics. Like we're hit by another character, so we want to turn into physicalize. So I'm going to drag and drop another behavior, and I'm going to put it in the first parallel. And what I want to have is characters falling as soon as they're hit by another character. So let's rename that behavior characters. Well, it's not the best name, but character physics, character hit physics is probably something which is more appropriate. And here we're going to stick with the default dynamic rigid body physicalize mode. So they'll just fall onto the ground as soon as they are hit. We don't need them, to play a falling animation, because they're just going to be hit by characters. So we don't want to play, well, we may want to play a specific animation, but not this one here. And obviously, as we've been doing, as we've been changing the stopping trigger for the one which is hit by a catapult, we need to change the stopping trigger for this one here to say, when do our characters will or just to fall and become ragdolls. So let's take a look at the triggers library, and anyone would guess what we could use to detect when we are hitting another character in the scene? So I got a pretty fast answer. Well, I got fast answers. You guys apparently all agree about using a collision trigger. So yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to do actually. So that's the right answer. We want to use a collision trigger there. So let's drag and drop. So also make sure that you are selecting the stop trigger of your new physicalized behavior. And let's grab a collision trigger. Right click, set as root, or use the V key to make it enable. And let's check what we have as controls on top of that physics triggers. So as soon as our characters, exist into the physics world, they are in collision with plenty of things. They are in collision with the ground, for example. So obviously we don't want to trigger a ragdoll as soon as you're in collision with the ground, because else that would happen at the first frame. So you want to be able, to filter exactly which collision you want to take into account, because you may be in collision with plenty of different things. Also, if you're colliding with someone who's already dead, you're walking, and for some reason you hit a leg of that guy which was already dead, probably is not a collision important enough to make the characters fall into the ground as well. So you also want to be able to filter based on some specific force kinetic value that you're having. So let's check what we have. We can add a filter on a physics mode, on an ID, on a color, or on a kinetic value, and we can actually combine those triggers together. So here we're going to filter a collision, and we want to make sure that it fulfills a specific value. So the first thing we want to take into account is we want to make sure that we are colliding with another green entity, which is in mode local servo. So all my other characters, they are in local servo, so they are flying around. So we want to detect collision only if the character that we are colliding with is in mode local servo. So let's add a physics mode collision trigger. So we can check if the collider that we are colliding with is in mode local servo. And if we run the simulation with this, we've got all the characters playing their nice animation. At frame 50, some characters explode. And it's not really working as I expected. Wait, let me check what I'm doing wrong here. Collider. Physics mode. Okay, that should actually trigger something. Okay, let me try something, and if that works, I'll just provide an explanation. Physicalize, kinetic, invert this. Let's see. Okay, that's not really working either. Alex, you got an idea about what I've done wrong? Probably, okay, that's probably not working.
I'm trying to think what could be wrong, but no.
Catapult Physics, okay. Never mind. Let's try another one. Well, maybe we'll have to, debug this. So let me check. Maybe we can try to rely. But color will not allow me to filter collisions. Okay. I'm disappointed here. Let's try ID, and ID will be, what's my ID of my soldier? It's 1, but that's not exactly what I want to do here. So if collider ID equals 1, let's see what we get. But we'll get characters falling even, yeah, we got characters falling from the beginning because they are in collision with each other. Okay, now what I want to do neither. And let's see if I can use maybe the kinetic value there. Collider velocity, kinetic energy. Let's say 10. No, okay, I really need to use the mode okay, for some reason it's not working in that version. So that's probably something I haven't used for a while, but you would expect if you use local servo rigid body, and they're supposed to be in local servo rigid body, you would expect them to react to this, but for some reason they are not reacting. So we have to check the code, but that's actually the way you would tackle this. Let me check if I put another mode here, dynamic. Okay, so this is working, but it should not. But this is kind of working. Some entities are actually reacting and some are not. Wait. Anyway, so, okay, let me just clean my scene a bit. Let's remove this. Let's see if that's still working. Because I can see some collisions here and there, but the characters are not reacting to them. But still some characters are falling. Okay, so apparently there's just a quick bug that is not really able to read the fact it's in local servo. So we'll have to check exactly what's going on. But apparently in the meantime, what we can do is setting it up to dynamic rigid body. Even if they are not in dynamic rigid body, they're actually in local servo. Apparently that's good enough. So characters, as soon as they hit other characters, they kind of turn into their physics as well. So, okay, let's set it up to dynamic rigid body here. And also we may want to combine it with some kinetic value, because even if the characters, you know, they're on the ground, if you hit the character which is on the ground, this is not a good reason enough to actually fall as well. So we can combine it with another physics mode. So we can check if the same collision is following that rule, and we can also add a kinetic value rule, which is looking if the person that you are colliding with has a velocity which is superior to whatsoever, as a mass which is superior to whatsoever, or as a kinetic energy which is superior to whatsoever. So kinetic energy is just the velocity multiplied by the mass. So if you're hit by, you know, a ball, you may be hit really fast, but it's not fast enough for you to fall. But if that ball is in iron, let's say, it's gonna have a super high mass. As soon as it hits you with a really high speed, obviously you want to react to this. So you can say, okay, if the kinetic value, the kinetic energy of the character is superior to, let's say 10, for example, I want to fall, which means that you're going to filter collision if characters are just on the ground and not moving anymore. And I want to validate this. But anyway, we'll have to fix the local servo trigger so it reacts properly. But now I've got, you know, characters reacting, falling into the ground, and you know, playing what we want. Yes, thank you. And final stuff with which I'm not really happy with. So that's the Catapult Physics, that's the Physicalize Physics, so all good. Something which I'm not really happy with is that those characters which have been hit by another character, as soon as they go out of the parallel, they will play that part of the graph. So they will detach, play the falling animation, play the force animation. So if I don't want them, you know, to be influenced by that piece of the graph, what I can just do is say to the parallel that rather than exiting and go to the next piece of the graph as soon as one behavior has ended, which means it doesn't make any difference if the character has been hit by a catapult or has been hit by another character. You may want to say, okay, I want to set my physics as soon, or I want to move into the next block as soon as a specific behavior has ended. And now you can pick which behavior you want to monitor. So you can say, okay, I want to monitor the catapult physics, and I want my characters to, you know, move into the next part of the graph only if they are hit by a catapult. And if they're just hit by another character, they just fall onto the ground and become, you know, physics. So that's just another way to, you know, make sure that some people play a different behavior than others based on some rules. Great, excellent. So now we've got a battlefield with some catapults in it. And do we have a poll on that scene, Alex, or that's going to be on the next one? Yeah, so probably now it's a good time to wrap this up. I haven't saved the scene for the whole duration of the academy, so which is not a good idea. I should save it like right now. And this scene will be shared with you afterwards as well. So that's third session A. And that's, yeah, I'm actually confident in my software. I know that's, you know, it's production ready, but I know in some occasion also Maya can be tricky. So you sometimes when you select a Maya object, you may crash out of somewhere. So yeah, let's save that scene. So it's going to be charging army with physics. So there's a poll on your side, checking if you were able to do to follow the tutorial. So let us know if you were able to follow. I know it was kind of a bit more complicated at what we've been doing so far, charging army with physics. And let's go back into the GPU. We're in the previous mode. so we can see the actual simulation. And let's save that scene. And I wanted to play with the layout, but I'm probably going to play with the layout on another scene. So let me just wrap that scene so you can save it somewhere. What I just want to do is to start another scene and work with archery soldiers to show you more behaviors that we are not been playing with so far. So let's save this and go into File New. So if you were not able to follow that scene so far, we can just jump to something new, and you can probably catch up with that now. So okay. Sometimes when you make armies simulation, it happens quite often that you want to have archery soldiers, and you want archery soldiers to obviously throw arrows. So how you would tackle that? So one can say, okay, I can go in Houdini and I can emit characters. I can emit rigid body objects from Houdini from some locators, but that's also something you can handle entirely into the crowd simulation software. So rather than changing software, and also you want your other characters probably to react to arrows. If they're hit by an arrow, you want them to react to that and fall onto the ground, like we've been doing so far with the catapult. So it could be a good idea to stick into the same software and do this into the exact same simulation. So for this matter, we're going to start with a blank scene. We may want to do a terrain because in a real situation, we'll have some terrain. So just to stick with, just create a plane here, scale it so it's big enough to handle my characters, and go into the Golem shelf and select the geo, select the terrain locator node from the shelf. So that's the fifth icon here. And we created a terrain environment here. Okay. So also let's save that scene, 03B archery. Great. And as always, when we want to start a new scene, let's create a new antitype in the scene. So we're going to grab from the character pack the character called Soldier Fortress. It's a character which who has amongst the different props is having a bow and also a quiver. I think that's the word, a quiver with arrows. So that's the kind of bag where you put your arrows in. So let's bring the Soldier Fortress in. If you want to bring the shaders, once again, it's Soldier Fortress and the name of your rendering engine. So here I'm using Arnold. So Soldier Fortress, Arnold. And yeah, we can see the character here. It has plenty of props stacked on the same position, but you can see on the left arm is having a bow, and on the back is having a quiver. So we'll see later how we'll make sure that all the characters will have that distribution of assets. So let's rename that entity type in the scene. That's going to be my soldier type. Soldier type. And here we want to have another kind of character, which will be the arrows. So anything which will be manipulated by behavior needs to be a golem character. So it needs to have a skeleton and so on. So here for that specific topic of making archery soldiers, we made a specific character, which is an arrow, which we rigged. So let's take a look how it looks. Let's bring another entity type in the scene. And this time, let's select the Soldier Fortress Arrow Golem character. And if you want to bring the shaders, it will bring the character in the scene. So you can bring Soldier Fortress Arrow and the name of your rendering engine. And if you don't have any rendering engine being set, use the default one. So you can bring the characters in and we can take a look at how it's made and how many bones we put and why we put that many bones in it. So here I'm going to use the Soldier Fortress Arrow. I'm going to rename this arrow type. So I'll have green characters, which will be my archery soldiers, and blue character, which will be my arrows. Quick note about the arrow as I was referring. So let me hide the character for just a minute. So we can see here, my arrow has 3 different bones. It has one here for the tip, one here for the body, and one there for the fevers. And the reason we created those 3 bones here is because we wanted to be able to provide different physics properties to the different piece of the arrow. Remember, I was showing you earlier that you can approximate your character geometry with shapes like spheres, capsules, boxes, where you could provide joint limits and where also you could provide some different densities. So we haven't really spoke about densities, but if I check my arrow character, so if I open it with the character editor and edit the physics properties, we can see that we've got the head tip. So the head tip is going to be like the actual tip of the arrow, and then the head, which is actually the body. And what we've been doing is specifying different mass for the tip and for the body. So if my character has a higher mass for the tip, it means that when I'm going to throw it, it will not twist or spin around it. The fact that it's heavier on the tip will mean that my arrow will make a nice ballistic trajectory when it's going to thrown. If I don't do this, it means that every single part of my character has the same mass, so it may twist, spin, move on the side, or do something which is not really realistic. So this is why we make 3 bones into the system to be able to provide different mass values for each part of it. So that was just really like a side note. So it has, it has Apple vectors, but for real, it doesn't have any IQ or animation. That's just because we need to put a spine there. But it doesn't have any influence on the final animation of that character. Okay, so that's for my arrow character, and that's for my actual archery character. So next that we've been creating our different types, we need to populate the scene with our soldiers. So let's make a grid of archery soldier. So from the population tool, double-click to open the tool settings. I can create a grid, or you can just select whatever you want to here. You're big enough now to do your own population. I want to specify that I want to have only green characters into the system. So I go into the anti-types attributes, remove the arrow types, put it to 0, set up my grid of soldiers, probably invert it like 15, 15 to, on the other side, 515. Great. Put some distance between those guys to make sure that they're not going to throw arrow into each other's. Noise those a bit. And press create. So, okay, I've been creating just a bunch of archery soldiers. And if I run the sim, if I take a look now, I've got my soldiers. So far, so good. But you can see they are not holding any bow, and they don't have the quiver on their back. So if you remember, that's something we've been doing in the latest session. It was checking what rendering types are available for that character. So if I go back into my entity type of my soldier, if I check the rendering attributes, I can see from the dropdown that I've got multiple choices. So those are presets that we made for that actual character. And one is called Arrow Attacker. And Arrow Attacker, if we inspect the character file, so let's go into the geometry tab. Let's close all the different types except Arrow Attacker. So we can see that Arrow Attacker has diversity on the armors, but on the swords, it doesn't have any sword in the right hand. It has empty on the right hand. So empty is just a group not connected to any mesh. So it means that my characters will be empty-handed in the right hand, and into the shield, they won't have any shield. So it's empty also on the shield. And we have a bow group. So the bow group make a variation between the double bow and the simple bow. So it means that in the left hand, that will have a bow. And we also have a quiver group asset, and we can see that 100% of a crowd will have a quiver on their back. So they'll have a quiver variation between simple bow and double bow in the left hand, and empty-handed in the right hand. So that's exactly what we need. So I can go back into my entity type, select the Arrow Attacker, assign it to my characters, and I can either remove the other one or put it to 0. If I put it to 0, Next time I'll throw the same, I'll have only arrow attackers. So that's great. If I remove it, that's the same. Next time I'll have my characters with variation on the armors, a variation on the bow, variation on the helmets, but all of them will have the right equipment for doing an archery scene there. Great, excellent. So we have our archery characters there. So we want to assign them with a motion. So we want them to throw some arrows. So that's a motion that we provided to the character pack. So let's open the behavior editor. Let's select the soldiers behavior graph, which is empty. We want to assign them with a motion. So I'm just going to grab a motion behavior here, drag and drop it onto my characters, and I can rename that behavior right away, like throw, or I'm not sure what's the right verb I should use, throw arrows or launch arrows. No issue. So let's, yeah, throw arrows there. Yeah, shoot. Shoot, that's way better. Shoot arrows there. Thank you. Let's double click on that motion behavior and let's check in the character pack into Golem, motions, and into the battle scenes. We probably have a shoot arrow animation here. So if you check soldier underscore shoot underscore arrow, that's probably the right motion we want to play. So let's run that motion here. And let's check what we have. So yeah, perfect. We have characters taking, well, faking the fact that they take an arrow from their quiver, arming, and throwing. Great. So how do we add diversity into this? Should we, well, let me know. How do we add diversity on that crowd so they don't look all the same? Start percent and speed ratio, or start percent. So, okay, we kind of, two of you agreed on start percent. So let's bring start percent. That's actually a good idea. So yeah, start percent is quite good to bring some diversity. Speed ratio as well. We can bring diversity with the speed ratio, having some people being slower, some people being faster. Great. Should we apply some mirroring on the animation? You tell me. Well, let's see what it does if we apply just a mirroring on the animation. So if we mirror the animation, we'll have we'll have characters using their bow hand to take an arrow and their empty end to hold the bow, which does not exist. So here, as the geometry has not been assigned this way, that's not going to work. So that's something which would have to be taken into account into the way the character is made. So here the character is asymmetrical, so we don't want to mirror the animation. So let's go back to the original stuff. Great. You may also notice that the characters, they are actually throwing arrows on the side. So that's something we've been seeing in one of the previous course. We can apply an adapt orientation to offset the orientation. We can apply a set bone to just apply an offset on the root bone if we want, or maybe another hack I can provide is just in the population tool, we can compensate the orientation. So, we can just slightly shift the character's orientation, replace them. So the next time we throw the same a bit more, it just compensates, for this. There, replace. Great. Well, plenty of different manners to fix that, but you get the idea, right? Okay, sweet. So now they're playing an animation. And what I would like to do is to have that archery character, as soon as it release the rope, I'm not sure if that's a rope, but the string of the bow, you want it to emit, so to create a new character in the scene. And you want that new character in the scene to be an arrow character. So let's go into the behaviors and let's check into the behaviors of the soldiers, what we have. So I'm not going to ask which behavior we should use because it's actually we've got plenty of behaviors, and the one I'm looking for is quite back in the list. So the one we want to use is actually, we call it the emit behavior. And I've lost my tooltips once again. Thank you, Maya. So let's go back into display tool clips here. So the one I want to use is emit. So you can see the emit icon is a T-pose character, 3 green arrows, and some particles next to him. And if I hover the mouse on it, it tells it's emit a Golaem entity or a particle from a bone position and orientation. So that's exactly what we want to do, but we can also use that behavior to actually emit some particles from a character at some point. Let's say you want to emit dust or mud from some character's feet. You can also use that behavior to emit some particles, and you can use those particles to snap your cards or effects on it. So as always, where should we put this behavior? Should we put it before? Should we put it after? Should we put it at the same position? What would you say? Parallel, at the same position. Okay, we all agreed here. So let's put it at the same position. Indeed, we want, sorry, we want that behavior to be played at the same time. So we want to emit a character at the same time we release the string of the bow. So I'm gonna drag and drop it to the same position, release it, and now they are running at the same time. Great. So let's take a look at the attributes of that emit behavior. First, we've got a shared pool size. So shared pool size is how many entities we're going to emit for the whole duration of the simulation for the whole bunch of characters that we have here. So 50 means that those guys will emit a maximum of 50 arrows total in the scene. So even if those guys are, I'm not really sure how many I have. Let's check. I have 75 characters here. So if I let it to 50, it means that only 50 of them, the first 50 ones, will emit a character and will emit an arrow, so that's not big enough. But on the meantime, you don't want to put a too high number into this, because if you say, let's say you want to be safe here, you want to put 50,000 characters, what we're going to do in Golem is what we're going to allocate in memory the size to store 50,000 characters. And obviously you don't want to allocate so much space in the memory if you're not going to use it. So you want to have a number which is actually legit here. So I've got 75 characters. My shot is going to be 300 frames. There's a chance each of them will throw maybe 4 arrows. So I can stick with probably 300 characters. That should be good enough. Great. Then after, you've got the maximum entity generated by that behavior. So every time this behavior runs, how many arrows you'd like to throw. So wow, most of the time characters just throw 1 arrow at a time. So we're just going to say we want to maximum generate 1 entity every time this behavior runs. Great. Then we've got the rate per second. So what's the frequency at which we're going to emit a character? So 5 means 5 per second. So in the duration of 25 frames, we're going to throw 5 characters. But we are saying that we just want to have 1 character being emitting every time this behavior runs. And actually, we want that character to be emitted right away. So when the behavior starts, we want an arrow to be triggered because we're going to start that behavior exactly at the moment the string is being released. So we want to make sure that at the frame the behavior run, the frequency is high enough so a character is emitted. So if my scene is at 24 frames per second, I will have to put a number here, which is at least the same value or higher to make sure that at the first frame that behavior runs, an arrow will be created. So I can put 24. So I make sure that at the exact moment it will be created. Then I need to say from which bone my character will be emitted. So, okay, question for you here. What's the bone I should use to attach my arrow from? Let's open the list. Right end, elbow, or you don't take any risk. Provide me a side as well. Don't say just elbow or right hand, left arm, right weapon. Le coude. Yeah, but which one, left or right? Okay, left elbow. So they're mostly good answers here. Yeah, left weapon will work. Left wrist would work as well. I'm just I tend not to use the right wrist because in this animation the right wrist is here, it's quite far. So if I emit an arrow here, there's a chance that especially if I move orientation and so on, there's a chance that the character will be emitted directly in the body of the soldier. So I usually tend to have them being emitted in that area here. And I also tend not to attach it to fingers because fingers, they have weird orientation. So indeed, the left elbow will be correct. The left wrist will be correct. The left weapon will be correct as well. So all good answers there. For the sake of this one here, I'm just going to select wrist L because I'm not really sure in which orientation is the weapon L, but I just stick with wrist L here. Great. And we've got local position offsets, orientation offset. We're going to change those later. We've got also a out particle system. So where should the arrows be stored? So for now, we don't have anything to store them. So we'll have to create an empty particle system to do this. And finally, what kind of entities we're going to emit. So here we're saying we're going to emit, we'll have a chance of 50% to emit soldiers, and we'll have a chance of 50% to emit arrows. Obviously, we want to turn off the soldiers, else that would do crazy stuff of soldiers being emitted from other soldiers and so on. Actually, it's quite funny too. We may change the value afterwards to see how it looks. So last stuff we need to set up here is the particle system in which the entities need to be stored. So it's something I kind of didn't really say on purpose, is that you may have noticed by yourself actually that anytime you create a population tool and you press on the create button, you end up with that green dot here in your scene, and they are all around. And you may also notice that in your scene, you've got a particle system into the population group. That's because within Golem, we rely on particles. We kind of hide it because we don't take much advantage anymore on particles. And it's really something which is legate into the software. It's legacy into the, well, not legate, but legacy into the software. But when you actually use the pop tool to create your crowd, you're actually emitting particles, and those are just Maya regular particle system. And those particles are connected to a specific field, which is turning the particles into crowd entities. So to make sure that not all the particles in the scene are going to be a crowd character, only the one which are attached to a crowd field are going to be turned into a crowd, which means that if you use Maya particles in your scene if you use Maya emitters or whatsoever in your scene and you want them to be Golem characters, you just have to attach a crowd field on them. And as soon as they will be attached to a crowd field, that will be turned into a character. So that if you want to use your own tools to generate particles, that's something which could work as well. So what the emit behavior is asking is actually a particle system in which the arrows will be created, emitted. So what we can do is just create an empty particle system. And the fastest way to create an empty particle system is to open the population tool, create a grid, put the number of positions of the grid to 0, and press create. So by doing so, what we'll do is creating an empty particle system, and we can use that empty particle system to hold my arrow particles. So put the slot to zeros. So create a new population tool, the simplest one you can. Put the slots to 0, press create. Now you can see we end up with another particle system. And we can say to the emit behavior now that it can use that new particle system. We can rename them, by the way. We can say that's soldier particles, and that's arrow particles. Great. And we can say into the behavior editor, we want to emit the arrows into the arrow particles shapes there, which means that now when we're gonna throw the sim, if we run it for one more frame, you can see that at the position of the wrist, now there's an arrow which appears. Can you repeat where you press to create the particle system? Sure. Let me go back to, let me redo this operation here. So I'm gonna remove the nodes. So I've got my soldiers, particles, my crowd field, and my population tool. So what I just did is I went into the population tool. I opened the population tool by double clicking on it. So it opens the tool settings. I selected the grid shape. I clicked anywhere into the viewport. I don't care because I'll just create an empty particle system. So I just created a grid particle system. You can see it has 5 positions in it. Let's remove those 5 positions. Let's put the positions to 0. So it doesn't have any positions anymore. And let's press create on that new system. It creates automatically a new particle system, which is going to be blue in that case. Let's rename this arrow particles. And let's connect it to our emit behavior, select the arrow particles shape. And now when we run the sim, we can see that at frame 3, now we got the arrows being emitted where the wrist is. Let's say we want to emit soldiers. It now means that on the wrist, we'll have soldiers being emitted. And from those soldiers, there are going to be arrows or more soldiers being emitted. And you can do a fractal crowd of characters. Let's see if I put 600 there. Yeah, you got weird scenes there. So, okay, let's go back to what we have before. We just want to emit arrows there. Great. So you may notice that the arrow is not exactly aligned the right way with the wrist. So that's because the orientation of the wrist at that moment is not exactly the one of the actual character. So we want to reorient the character. And for this, we've got something called the local orientation offset. So we can apply an offset. So let me figure, I think if we apply an offset on, I think my character is Z front. So if I apply 90 degrees on the Z axis, where are they? 90 degrees local orientation offset. Wait a minute, I can't see them anymore. Yes, okay. They are onto the ground. Yeah, okay. I think I had it before, right? Let me check. No, they don't. Okay, true. Okay, tricky stuff. And it's actually why I created a terrain and actually forget to take this into account. So by default, every single character that you're going to create within Golem will be adapted to the ground. As soon as there's a terrain in your scene, as soon as a new character is created, it will be adapted to the ground. So how does ground adaptation works? We're going to look, so this is also why we ask when a character is created, we ask what's its up axis and front axis. Remember when we were converting our own characters, we had a window which was asking what's the up axis and front axis, because we're going to use that data to know how we're going to adapt a character to the ground. So what we'll do is we're going to look at orientation of the character, and we're going to do some ray cast. So every single character on their feet or on their root bone, they're going to do a ray cast. And if we hit the terrain, when we do a ray cast, we're going to just snap the character onto the ground. So here, as we've got a terrain on our scene, and we've been changing the orientation of the character, the arrows that gets adapted to the ground. So let me redo this. I put a local orientation offset of 90 degrees. Here for now, if I throw an, if I ray cast a ray in the direction, the direction will be in that direction. The ray will be thrown into that direction here, and it will not hit anything related to the terrain. So this is why they are not moving. But as soon as we change their orientation, like put a 90 degrees orientation here, and we throw the same, now the characters are here, they are created, but they are created and snapped onto the ground. So we've been, they ray cast a ray from their actual orientation, and they figured that if they raycast a ray, they're going to hit an actual position on the terrain, and this is why you've got all your arrows being planted into the ground. So obviously we don't want arrows to be adapted into the ground. There's no way, it doesn't mean anything. So if an entity type doesn't have to be adapted into the ground, we can just disable ground adaptation. To disable ground adaptation, I can go into the arrow entity type. I can go into its advanced attributes, and you'll have a default ground adaptation. By default, you can see it's enabled. So we can turn this to disabled to say, okay, I don't want you to be adapted into the ground. And the next time you throw the same, you can see that the arrows are created at the right position, and they are not snapped into the ground anymore. So, okay, that's actually what I wanted. Almost, because my arrows are actually reversed. So what I need to do is to just say to my emit behavior that it's going to be minus 90 degrees. And now I should get my arrows being aligned with the rest. Excellent. Great. Okay, I've got a question. Let me try to check that one. In case of people throwing object by hand after a bunch of animation like locomotion, can I detach bone? Can the detached bone be a way of getting the inherited velocity rotation and throw the object, or visibility switch with a generate particle would be more appropriate? Actually, both will work. Well, if you want to inherit velocity, for sure, detaching the bone will be easier, because it will be the same character. It will exist for the whole duration of the shot. So when you detach it, it will already have the right velocity. What we'll do in case of the arrow here is we're going to provide the initial velocity when you will start existing. We're going to provide an initial velocity, but it's no way related to the motion. So if you want to have variation based on the motion, probably the best way is to detach a bone rather than using the emit stuff. But I'm pretty sure you won't notice, if you provide just random inherit velocity there, you can also do that, and probably nobody will notice that if a character was playing a really hard throw, the stone or the object he's going to throw will be different from the one who's playing a light throw. Great. So what else should we do? Well, we should actually emit the arrows at a specific timing. So here, all the characters, they are emitting the arrow, when the simulation starts, but we actually want to emit this arrow at a specific moment. We want to do it especially when they release the string of the bow. So let's check my animation. Let's go into the shoot arrow motion behavior, or I can go into the motion clip and select the motion clip here and press play. I can actually check my motion. So let's pause it and let's move in time. So the frame I would like to monitor is currently it's releasing the string on frame 72. So, okay, on frame 72, I want my characters to emit an arrow. And that's the only moment where I want this to happen. So it means that my emit behavior need to start at a specific moment, which is when my motion behavior is at frame 72. To do this, I can change my start trigger of my emit behavior. So I'm going to select it, double click on it. Right now, I can see that the emit behavior happens right at the moment the simulation starts because it's set up to true. And I want to use another trigger, which allows me to inspect plenty of different things from the scene. I'm not sure we've been playing with that one. It's the expression trigger. So let's drag and drop the expression trigger, and we can see it tells that it's returned true based on a Golaem expression or a channel value. So it's kind of the trigger where you can inspect anything you want in the scene or in the simulation and check the value of what it is and react to this. So for example, we'll be able to check what's the current frame being played by another motion. We can check what's the orientation of a bone from a specific character. We can check what's a specific value of a Maya node and a specific attribute of a Maya node. So let's grab the expression trigger. Let's set it as root. With right-click set as root or press the V key. And let's check what we have in terms of control. So we can write an expression. We've got an operator, a value, and a threshold. So here we would like to check what's the current frame of a motion. So let's check what are the different values being available for that expression here. And if I type frame into the filter, I can see that I have this current frame. So current frame is the Maya current frame, a geometry frame if we play a geometry cache, start frame and frame. So that's not what we need. And we've got this dot bracket behavior name dot motion frame. And the last one we have is number of frames. So number of frames provides the actual size of the motion. So how many frames the motion have. So motion frames is what's the currently played frame from a motion clip. So let's select that one here. And the fact that we have a bracket behavior name means that we need to replace that piece of expression with an actual real behavior existing in the scene. So in my scene, I've got a behavior named shoot arrows. So let's copy that name. Let's go into the expression. Let's replace that bracket. So let's remove entirely it. So I just have dot now. And in between the dots, let's put the name of my behavior. So shoot arrows motion frame. Great. So now we're checking what's the current frame being played on the motion clip of the shoot arrows behavior. What's the value we should put here? So, well, if you remember, I was saying they're releasing the string on frame 72. So let's put 72 here. But maybe more tricky, or maybe trickier here is what operator we should use. So we've got equal, different, inferior or equal, inferior, superior, equal. And yeah, I'll let you think about it. So first answer I'm getting is superior equal. Does anyone has another proposition to do? Okay, nobody. So let's stick with, okay, we also have like equal equal. Or different. Okay, let's have them all. So let's try them one after the another, right? Let's say superior equal. So when my motion is superior or equal to frame 72, then throw an arrow. Let's see what we get. Let's check. I want to, yeah. Let's see that guy here. So that guy here has an arrow next to him. And let's check which frame he's playing. He's playing frame 90. So from the beginning, he's already having a frame which is superior to 72. So when the simulation starts, he's emitting an arrow right away. So superior equal in that specific scenario, as the start percent of my animation is set up to the full range of my animation, it means that we're having characters which are at the end of the motion clip, which are emitting arrows when the simulation starts. So not exactly what I want. Let's say equal equal. Let's go into my trigger. Let's say we want to use equal equal. So sorry, there's a bug in Maya. So this is why you ended up with your, well, at least in Maya 20 and Maya 2022. You've got, you just need to consider the first two signs. What you get afterwards, like equal 0, equal 1, equal 2 is just a display bug from Maya. We have reported it, but it's not fixed yet. So let's say equal equal 72. And let's run the sim. Let's click on that guy here. So that guy here, for example, is playing frame 63.8. And 63.8 means that is not playing an actual frame of the motion. So we may be lucky, and no, we are not going to be lucky. So you can see it went from 71.8 to 72.4. And the reason for this is because we changed the speed ratio. So as we change the speed ratio, the motions is scaled up or scaled down. So we're never hitting exactly the frame 72. So are we stuck? Can we figure something else? Well, I can answer the question myself. What if we use the threshold field? Yes, what if? So if you're in 813, we've been having something called the threshold. So threshold is just a value you can provide. And we're going to look, let's say we provide a threshold of 1. It means that now we're going to check if the motion frame is comprised between 71 and 73. Any value between 71 and 73 will make sure that the arrow has been emitted at that moment. So yeah, that's probably something which could be convenient here. Like here on that character is playing frame 71.1. So I expect the arrow to be emitted right after. And here we can see the arrow being here. So yeah, the threshold is going to work perfectly here. And that's exactly what we need. So it allows us to cope with the fact that the animation has some fuzzy frame in it. If you are using another version that's than 813, because that's something which is really, really brand new. So let's say you don't have it. So by default, it's at 0. What you can do is you can combine it with another trigger. So this is why we added the threshold, is because that was a pain to deal with it before. So what you could say is you could say, okay, I want my motion to be inferior to 72. And you were about to create another expression trigger, put the exact same expression in it, and say, I want it to be superior to frame, let's say 70. And you would combine those two together with the AND operator. So now you're saying if your motion frame is superior to 70, but inferior to 72, then you'll throw your arrow, which is exactly what the threshold field is doing, is checking if you are between 70 and 72. And when you throw your sim, now you have your characters throwing an arrow at the right moment. So depending on which version you're running, you'll have to either put 2 triggers or just one with the threshold. So I hope that makes sense. Great. We're almost done with the archery soldiers, but let's stick with that for the moment, and let's save that scene. So now we need to drive the arrows, because the arrows, they are being emitted from the position of the wrist, and then they just don't move. So we need to assign some behaviors to those characters, but it's already 10 past 9. So let's make the final break, 5-minute break, and let's meet at 16 past 9, and we'll see how we can drive those arrows after that. Yes, I can see I got a question: how to unlock crowd manager when I try to delete it? It's saying it's locked and cannot be deleted. So if you go into the crowd manager node, it has a unlock crowd manager node button. So if you click on it, it will unlock it and you'll be able to delete it. But keep in mind that if you delete it and you still have a simulation in your scene, you may have a crash the next time you run the simulation. So make sure that you just use the delete all Golem nodes button to clean your scene and remove everything which is related to Golem. So yeah, let's meet back in 5 minutes. Okay, back. So final line of that first session. Let's make those arrow fly. I've seen the questions about arrows being emitted on the ground. That's, I guess, Alex already answered, but that's because by default, characters are adapted to the ground. So into your arrow entity type, you want to go into the advanced attribute panel, which is almost at the end. You want to expand it. And you want to go into default granulation and switch it to disabled, because by default, once again, characters always adapt to the ground. And as we have been creating the ground, so this is why they are snapped right away onto the ground. So just make sure that you disable granulation here. Awesome. Great. So let's drive those particles. Let's drive those arrows. Let's have them flying around. Obviously, would like to use the physics engine once again to fly them around. So let's open the arrow behavior container, double click on the arrow type. You can see for the moment, my arrows, they are not doing anything. So I want to use the physics engine. So if I want to use the physics engine, as always, I need to bring in a physicalized behavior, because by default, characters don't have any physics properties. They don't belong to a physics world, or they don't compute any computation. So let's bring a physicalized behavior and let's change the stop trigger. Remember that physicalized behavior only affects the entity as soon as it stops. While it runs, it accumulates velocities. So what we want to do is stop that behavior at a specific moment. And that specific moment is just right away. We want our arrows to be physicalized at the moment they are emitting and they are created. So we want to open that stop trigger. So double click on it. And if we want it to, if we want them to right away exit that behavior, we can just use the default false trigger, the default Boolean trigger, and we can just revert the value. So check the true checkbox. So it means that as soon as the character will be created, they will exit that behavior and they will turn into a physics object. Should we change the settings for the physicalize? So right now they are in dynamic rigid body. Is it okay, or should we use another mode? What would you say? It's okay. Dynamic. Yeah, agreed here. Let's stick with the dynamic. So dynamic is what we use for rigid body. For ragdolls, or this is what ends up as being a ragdoll, but it's not realistic, because humans, when they turn into ragdolls, they are just inanimated. They don't have any life anymore, which is not exactly what's going on in real life. In real life, people tend to, keep their balance, play some motions, protect themselves from falling. But in case of an arrow, there's no intelligence. It's just an object. So rigid body, dynamic rigid body, we're just going to be fine. So let's see what we get if we just run the simulation with a dynamic rigid body. I just have my arrows, just falling on the floor, which is expected. It's a rigid body, so it just fall on the floor, collide with the floor, bounce it slightly. And yeah, that's it. So obviously we want to provide an initial velocity. So to provide an initial velocity, let's bring another behavior. And for that specific matter, we can use the force behavior. So remember, we used the force behavior to create a catapult impact. So that was applying a force on the character to repulse it. So now we can use that force behavior to also provide an initial velocity. So I haven't asked where we should put it. I put it like I'm really used to do that kind of setup, so I naturally put it afterwards. So first we want to turn the character into a physics character, and right after we want to apply some initial velocity to the characters. So let's take a look. Should we apply an impulse, or should we apply a constant force? Impulse, impulse, impulse. Okay, we all agreed. So indeed, that string being released is just something which happened once. So that's just an impulse. And you're correct. If you apply a force, it means that that's a rocket. So it has a motor which is pushing the arrow, and it will never go back to the ground. So here the whole point is provide just an impulse. So at some point it will go back to the ground. Then the direction we need to use. Here we're going to use the character relative force, because there's no way we can provide a vector. There's no way we can provide a locator. So we really want it to be, relative to the character. The character will be created in a specific way, and we want it to go on the direction of the tip of the arrow. So if we take a look at my arrow, which is at my scene origin, so it's Y up. The character is Y up, but the tip of my arrow is, let's close the visualization because I can't see my character anymore. Up. The tip of the arrow is really pointing towards minus Y. So it means that the direction in which we want to go is minus Y. We want to go in the direction of the tip. So let's put in the character relative field, we want to put a -1 here. So we want to go in that direction compared to the character orientation. Great. And by the way, if you provide value for the direction, the value for a locator, so everything will be headed to each other. So we do a sum of all the values we have here. So this is why we stick to 0 for the rest, or nothing. And it's exactly the same for the magnitude as well. We're just going to sum everything which is into the magnitude there. And that's as this object is like super light, we don't need to provide a too big magnitude. We can provide probably a 10 magnitude and see what we get out of this. So let's check. Oh, I think my orientation is not correct, because my characters are, yeah, okay, they're flying in weird directions here and there. So should it be like character relative 1 instead of -1? Wait. Let's see. I did not expect that, actually. Your force is set up to constant. Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. I think that's it. Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you for fixing this. Else it would have taken a lot of time for me to figure this out. Okay, now my arrow are getting into the right direction. Their tip first, they're probably a bit too high. So let's provide maybe less, like 6, and see where those arrows are going to end up. Oh, it's still, yeah, okay, still way too far. 3. Yeah, okay, better. Kind of better. Awesome. So awesome. Just I wanted to provide some noise. So let's say we want to provide some noise to the magnitude. You can see for both the direction and the magnitude, you can provide some noise value. So if you provide some noise, let's say 0.5, it means that the magnitude will be randomly picked between 2.5 and 3.5. So we're gonna add the noise on top of the magnitude and subtract it, and that will create the minimum and the maximum values. So and you can do something similar for the noise, the direction noise as well, like 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, and you'll have some scattering in terms of direction for the different arrows. Great. So yeah, if your characters are not flying, something you can check if, so select an arrow as soon as you see one, and make sure that they are playing the force behavior. If they are playing the force behavior, make sure that the physicalize has been played as well. And if they're still not flying, check if the force you've been providing is high enough. So here we've been saying we want to have an impulse. We want it to be character relative pointing towards the tip. So we want the character to fly in the direction of its tip. So we provide a -1 on the y-axis because the character has been made that way. And the magnitude, we provide a value of 3 to make them fly in the right direction. So yeah, try keep in mind that. And if that doesn't work, save your scene and you can set it to support and we can let you know exactly which parts you forgot about. So one last thing I would like to fix on my scene here is that my characters, they're still playing that animation, but once they've been emitting the arrows once, well, they're still, they don't throw it another time. So the reason for this is because when we've been creating our setup for the characters, we've been using the emit behavior. And we've been saying that the maximum arrow being generated by the behavior is just 1. So every time this behavior starts, it just generates 1 particle right away. But that's it, only 1. So what we need to do is restart that behavior every time we need it to be, we need the characters to throw some arrows. So to restart a behavior, we can use a specific operator which has been designed for that. It's the loop operator, which allows to loop a group of behavior. So we can bring that loop operator in. And what we'll do is detach the emit behavior. So if you remember, that's something we haven't done for a while. If you press Alt key, you select a behavior, you can see your icon turns into a razor shape. It allows you to unplug a behavior from its connection. We can drag and drop it within the for operator. So now we're saying when that behavior stops, let's restart it again. And let's put it back into the for loop, the parallel operator. So now we're shooting arrows, emitting arrows, and as soon as we're emitting 1 arrow, we're going to loop back. So we need to set one thing, because here, if I play the simulation, I select the character. Let's throw the simulation again. We can see right now he's playing the shoot arrow until he reaches frame 72. At frame 72, we should get the emit behavior appearing. So that's expected. An arrow being launched. And if he plays the animation again, he's not throwing an arrow for a second time. The reason for this is because we haven't said anything about stopping that behavior. So for now, that behavior still runs. And as it hasn't stopped, it doesn't need to go through the loop operator. It doesn't need to restart, and it doesn't need to rethrow another arrow again. So we need to stop it. And to stop it, we can use, we can say, okay, after it has been played for, let's say 3 frames, for example, I want to stop it and I want to resume it again. And as soon as frame 72 will appear in my motion, I want to re-emit and restart that behavior, play it for 3 frames, and do this as long as the simulation runs. So if we want to run it for only 3 frames, we can bring a behavior time trigger. So let's drag and drop the editor block here with a clock next to it. So not the one with the walking animation and the clock, just the behavior and the clock. Right click, set as root. And say we want it to play at least 3 frames, 5 frames, whatsoever. We don't really care the value. At least it has to be, you know, less than the number of frames in the animation. So next time we throw the sum, pick a character, we can see it's playing the animation, play the emit behavior, so it has time to emit the frame, the arrow. Then you can see the emit behavior stops. The behavior operator loops. Now we wait back for the animation to reach frame 72 again. And when it reaches frame 72 again, it restarts again and stops right away. Etc. etc. Why not 71 frames for the loop? You mean in the behavior? You mean here? Yeah, I think that could work. I just put some random numbers there. So if you put 71, you have to make sure that your motion is at least 71 frame, which is the case. So yeah, that would work. That would work exactly the same way as well. So if we put 71 here, that would work. We see the emit being played for 71 frames, stop, and then emit again, and then emit again, and so on and so forth. Just some random values. What I really want to avoid is to put just one here. If I put one here, there's a chance that, let's say we're at frame 71. For example, the motion is at frame 71. Well, here I put strict inferior, but yeah, let's say the motion is at frame 70.5, for example, and I put just one frame in the stop trigger. It means that 70.5, I emit an arrow, I stop right away because I stop at one frame after, so I stop at 71.5. Then it goes back, you reevaluate the trigger, and as here my range is between 70 and 72, if I put just one frame, it means that I'm gonna kick 2 frames every time my motion reach frame 70. So that's not what I want here. So I want to put at least a value which is bigger than the threshold I've been providing into my trigger system there. How to make an arrow stick into the ground. You guys are not using the Q&A form anymore, right? Yeah, that was going to be my last step there on my setup, plant them into the ground. So that's an actual, a good question. So we want to, and okay, and that's the good answer appearing here. So yeah, we want to go back into the arrow behaviors there. So here we've been applying a force. And what we can do is change our stopping trigger system and set it to, so here what we want to do is either, yeah, kinematic on collision. I'm not sure if that's going to work. Let's try. But what we could do is unphysicalize the arrow. But maybe that works actually. Let's see what we get. So it means that now we need to sequence another behavior. First, we've been physicalizing the characters, applying a force, and we need to put something here. So indeed, that something is a physicalized behavior. So let's put it afterwards. And as we want to be able to evaluate this, we need to stop the force behavior anytime. So force behavior, I can go into the stopping trigger, and as it just needs one frame to run, I can just go into the default trigger once again and set it up to true. And yeah, if I set it up to true, it means that now it goes to the next one. So let me check if that still works, by the way. I think that should work. Yeah, my arrow are being thrown, but they are being thrown in, that's weird, in weird directions here. Okay, I have to check exactly why I've got reversed. Oh, that's probably because of the noise, which is probably too high and makes some variation on the arrow. So, okay, anyway. So let's bring the physicalize here. Stop my force right away. My arrows are being thrown. Okay, let's say we want them to be planted into the ground as soon as they hit the ground. So indeed, what we want is as soon as there is collision, we want to turn them into a different state. So let's bring a physicalized behavior. and let's see what we have. So you can see we've got a lock posture on stop, and you can see that guy is disabled by default. And the way you have him available is by using the dephysicalize mode. So dephysicalize means that you're exiting from the physicalized state, so you don't have computation on that character anymore, which can be handy in terms of performances. Yeah, correct. Dephysicalize will save performance over kinematic, I think. And but you know what? I'm curious to know exactly what the kinematic is going to do. So let's switch to kinematic. Oh, and actually, wait. When I get to kinematic, I can lock posture on stop. So yeah, probably that's going to work then. So yeah, physicalize kinematic, lock posture, and it mean here it says lock posture on stop, and that you remember that physicalize behavior apply its state only when we stop it. So we're going to change the stop trigger of it. So I'm going to close all the triggers I'm going to need anymore. And I'm going to change. Yeah, true. I'm going to say I want to detect a collision, set it as root, and I want to detect a collision with the ground. So, well, a collision with anything actually. Physics mode, collision, collided. Wait, I'm not sure of what I'm doing right now, so let me just check this. And let me also remove. Let me follow one guy here. Well, it's not really convenient to follow arrows, so let me turn their display differently so I can actually see them. Oh, not better. Let me select an arrow. So it's playing Physicalize 2 until they reach. Haha. Damn. So there's clearly a collision here, but okay, we're not exiting. So okay, that's not working. So what you guys proposed? Kinematic on collision. Yeah, collision is what I expect to do here, but apparently it's not working. Collide itself with any. I wanted to. You can also check if you're colliding with something. So here apparently it's not working. So probably what I can do is maybe bring a rigid body. So I'm gonna just to create rather than using a plane here, I'm just gonna create like a box and make it at the same size of my plane. So something like this. It's probably going to be 300. 300. Yeah, okay. Let's put it there. Let's put it at the same 8 of the ground here. So that's going to be at 0.5. Okay, and let's make it a rigid body collider. So as soon as you turn it into a rigid body collider, you can see it ends up with a collision ID. So my collision ID is 0. So I can put some random value here. I can stick with 0 if I want, but let's say my collision ID is going to be 666. I can go into my trigger, and now I can filter a collision with an ID. So I can check an ID collision. So if my collider is a rigid body collision and it has an ID of 666, then go into kinematic mode. And let's see what it does now. It looks like they are planting into the ground rather than colliding with it, right? Or maybe that's because I'm too far. Yeah, okay, they're actually planting into the ground because they're going way too fast. So they are in collision with the geometry, but at least when they hit, at least when they hit the ground, they're actually outputting and exiting from the behavior. So they are planting into, but they really like colliding and going through it. Let me check if the dephysicalize and lock posture will do a better job. So let's see if for the arrow here. Okay, same job there. but at least they are planting, but we can only see the tip of them. So if you want to have, once again, if you want to have a better collision system here, probably the best way is to change your frame rate within Maya. So here, let's say we'll probably need to go 100 FPS rather than going 24. And now we'll get better collision. So now you can see, rather than, going through the ground, they're actually planting into the ground. But you pay the fact that now you have 4 times more frames. I think for hours we're increasing simulation step. Oh, you think so? Let me check this. So let's go back to 24. So you mean simulation in the crowd manager or simulation in the physics? Yes, physics. Okay, let's try if we.
Yeah, physics. Sorry, but it's supposed to be the same as increasing the FPS actually.
Yeah, true. Let me check this. So, okay, over solution rather than increasing FPS, which will get the rest of your simulation being less efficient. We can try going into the physics solver. So that's the number of substeps we're going to call here. So let's say we do 3 times more substeps. Maybe it will plant into the ground. Yeah. I'm not sure. Okay, let's put maybe a higher value, maybe like 20. It makes the simulation way easier. Well, it looks like I had a better simulation with my FPS rather than the physics FPS. We have to check that. But yeah, once again, it's covered by one of the tutorial regarding the physics system. So yeah, I will check with that, but I would say probably increasing the physics from the Maya scene appear to provide better results. I think there's a pull on the arrow characters, right? So let's bring that in. And yeah, let us know if you were able to at least have some arrows going through. Try more 24 went to 1000. Yeah, 1000 FPS. If you got like a really big simulation, that's going to cost you a lot of simulation time here. Well, good news is most of you guys were able to get your arrows through it. So well done. So we've got 15 minutes left. We don't have enough time to go with the flock. So maybe I'll keep it for the next session. And I really don't have enough time neither to get through layouts. So let's say we end up this session now. So we get 15 minutes free rather than usual. And on the next session, we'll go with car traffic, pedestrians, traffic lights, and interactions between cars and pedestrians. Any questions about today's sessions, what we've been doing so far, about armies, or about anything about the previous topic that you couldn't ask? Else, the replay will be probably provided in low quality right after this session. And if we got enough time, we should get the high quality one on tomorrow, I guess. Just need to create another army that gets killed by the arrows. Yeah, that would be a great assignment. So when is next training session? It's going to be on Wednesday, same timing. If you're not sure, go on academy.golaem.com. How do you manage interactions between the two armies? That's something I would have loved to do, and I didn't get enough time to do it. When we're gonna do pedestrian and cars, I'm gonna take advantage of something we call perceptions. So each entity is able to feel other guys, and it means that you can feel, for example, the closest entity next to you, which is part of your enemy army, which is still alive. So you can filter exactly what you want to fill, and once you know who'd like to fill, you can target his position and reach his position. And when you're close enough, you can trigger some animation. So perception is a great use to be able to know exactly how you can target two armies each other. I haven't had the chance to go through that, but we've got a couple of tutorials which show you that. Or on Wednesday, when we speak about +3 and cars, I'm also going to show you the main principles of perception. And if you understand how it works, you'll be able to refocus perception for your armies. Else, if you check your charging armies on the website and tutorials, you'll be able to figure it by yourself. What's your favorite use of Golem for film, games, or anything else? Well, there were so many projects. I would say my favorite at the moment is it's probably going to be Arcane on Netflix, produced by Fortiche Studio and Riot, mostly because I love the show and I thought the show was pretty smart and great. And the crowds are pretty invisible, so you don't really get them, but they give you a sense of that city is being living by. So that's pretty great. You meant, okay, interactions with physical contacts. So local servo or wood servo here. So if you trigger them with physics, if you assign physics to the character when they get in collision with each other, if you apply some local servo or wood servo on top of your characters, they will react to each other. That's not something we haven't been covered with tutorials, but that's probably something we should do. Because that's a pretty interesting topic. By the way, if you haven't been watched the Arcane show so far, I really recommend it. It's probably worth your time. Great. So if we're good, let's end up the session now and let's meet for the last one on Wednesday. So last one, we're going to speak about car and pedestrians. After that one, we'll have a bonus session, which will be completely optional, but we'll be targeting Unreal workflow. So you'll have to have Unreal being installed if you want to follow that tutorial. So either 4.27 or 5.0. And it takes some time to install Unreal because the package is pretty heavy. So yeah, make sure that you do this beforehand if you want to test the Unreal workflow. So once again, 4.27 or 5.0. And that's an optional session where we're going to speak about how you bring your crowds within Unreal. And in the meantime, also, since tomorrow on Wednesday on the last session, we're going to also describe more about assignment work. So if you guys want to work on your own shot, this is why we've been providing licenses. You'll be able to create your shot, ask for support on the Discord. We'll be happy to help you out. And most of the people who made an assignment and make a really good job out of it, they were able to get a job afterwards. So that really helps, putting it into the demo reel and selling your work to studios. So feel free to take some time to also make the assignment if you'd like. And we'll try to get some experienced crowd TD to review your shots and provide you some feedback. So we'll see who's available, but we'll try to ask David from AudioFX, William from Method Studio, Salou from Scanline. So those guys are working on high-end projects like Marvel projects. They've been working on GOT before, on Game of Thrones before, and really great shows. So they have pretty good feedbacks about the shots. And they're also going to be here, to try to see who's good and tell their recruitment about the guys. So great. In the meantime, take care. Stay safe. We meet for the last session on Wednesday then. Have a good evening.